Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto bonded with a symbiote and Carnage Marvel? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Black Thread, Bright Heart. The shrine at Uzushio had been broken a long time. Sea wind moved through gaps where walls used to be. Salt had grown white scars along the black basalt, and the old torii leaned like bones set wrong after a fight. Naruto stood at the edge of the cliff anyway, eyes full of sunlight off waves, scroll case tucked in his belt like any other cheap treasure picked up on a dare. Grandma always said, he told the gulls, open weird things next to water. If it goes bad, throw it at the ocean and run. It sounded like terrible advice when he said it out loud. He grinned and did it anyway. The scroll's seals were old Uzumaki script, precise as a metronome, full of little quirks he found charming, extra ink dots like freckles, a flourish at the end like someone couldn't help showing off. He breathed once, centered, and moved his hands. The unsealing release hissed. A cold snap kissed his fingertips, and a bead of night dropped onto his palm and did not fall. It didn't have a shape. It was a question. Naruto's first instinct was to clench. Instead, he opened his fingers wider. The bead tilted, listening. He smiled at it. The ocean boomed down the cliff, as if the world had leaned closer with him. You hungry? He asked softly, not sure for what. Me too. The bead climbed his palm like shadow in reverse, exploring knuckle, wrist, forearm with the patient curiosity of a cat in a new house. Where it touched, his skin went cool and alert. Every hair stood up. He felt his heartbeat through the cold, as if someone had lined the inside of his veins with silk. No voice, no words, but he felt the intent the way he felt wind on his cheek, want, sharp and clean. He set his rules in the same voice he used when he wanted to be taken seriously on missions. We help first, he said. We protect. We don't eat people. He paused, thought about the bandits who had cornered a grandmother 2 towns over, and added, we don't eat people even then. The bead shivered like laughter, then LLED up his shoulder and across his chest in a sheet so thin the sunlight still painted through it. It stopped at his throat as if politely asking. Naruto nodded once, and the night flowed over his face. Everything slowed. He could count the grains of wind moving past his ear. He could hear, distantly, the sea inside the rock. His balance shifted to places he hadn't owned before, the corners of his eyes, the hinge of his jaw. The bridge of his feet. He could have moved a silk thread and known which finger he'd used by the echo it made. All right, he whispered, and the shadow bent around his mouth like a smile. Let's go home. He took the long path along the coast out of respect for the old place. When he glanced back, the torii seemed straighter, only because he was leaving with something that belonged there and now belonged to him. By the time the orange roofs of Konoha winked between trees, the thing on his skin had learned the rhythm of his step. It didn't chatter. He appreciated that. He'd had enough chatter in his life from people who didn't think and liked the sound of their own worries. The shadow listened. The mission board rewarded him with AC rank escort down the river road. Merchants with new silk and iron fittings. Ordinary work with a sting in its tail, if only because people were involved. Naruto signed with a stroke and a grin that promised trouble only for troublemakers. He found his team waiting where the road turned from cobbles to packed earth. Hinata Hyuga with her calm eyes and hands that never shook even when her heart did, Tenten with a weapons scroll slung like a musician's case. And Azumo from the gate team assigned as token adult who would pretend not to see whatever needed pretending. Were a weird combination, Tenten observed, rolling her shoulder. I like it. Variety in the toolkit. Azumo smothered a smile. Hinata looked at Naruto openly for 2 breaths longer than usual. He felt seen without being inspected. Today we are aggressively normal, Naruto declared. Nobody do anything dramatic until the tea break. You say that now, Tenten said, but there's a bend on the river road where the dramatic lurks like a fox in a chicken yard. He could have said something cocky. He stored the line away instead. The shadow at his shoulders pressed against his jacket faintly as if paying attention. He pretended to adjust the collar and kept walking. The caravan was 10 wagons of ordinary. The merchants were worn around the edges, the way people get when their days are coins they spend carefully. Naruto bounced a little on the ball of his feet as he took his spot beside the front axle. He listened to the wheel song. He counted the kids. He mapped the road bend ahead in his head. The ambush came late, which was impolite. They waited until the road narrowed between rock wall and river, until the wagon's wheels had the least room to dodge. He heard it first. A breath that didn't belong, the scuff of boot on stone above them. Here goats should have been cling walking. The shadow on his back slid down his spine like a held laugh. "Hi right," Naruto said, not loud, not slow. Tenten's hands were already moving, scroll opening with a soft burr. Hinata's eyes bloomed pale lavender. She gave a small nod that meant she saw the same thing. Figures broke from the rocks in the next blink, faces covered with cloth that used to be white. The first volley was stones bound with paper charges that thunked rather than exploded. Smoke, then shouts, then everything wanting to spill into chaos like a knocked-over basin. Naruto was already in it. He didn't announce the change. He didn't say, "Watch this." Black spread over his right hand to the elbow in the time it takes to breathe. It shaped itself without being asked into a slick living glove with a suggestion of claws. He shot a line. No, not a line, a thought, up to the rock lip where one bandit leaned with a pike, and it stuck with a wet, certain sound. Naruto pulled. The man yelped, flailed, and landed in the dust with surprised eyes. Naruto caught him by the collar without looking away from the next one. The suit understood the second throw better than he did. They moved like a person who had 4 arms and didn't need the other 2 most of the time. "Hinata, count heads," he called, because Hinata's count would be right. "Tenten, crack smoke left, keep their line ugly." Hinata's fingers touched the wrist of a panicking merchant and guided him under a wagon with a gentleness that tolerated no argument. 7 civilians, she reported, voice clear. 2 children. 1 elderly. No, 2. She pivoted. Byakugan seeing through canvas, then through fear. Naruto. He was already moving toward the sound she hadn't had time to finish describing. Under the second wagon, a wheel wedged hard against a river stone. The axle groaned. A small colt, legs folded and eyes wide, had been pushed back by the wheel. It made the noise of a thing trying not to bite what hurt it. Naruto planted a foot, held up a hand, and didn't mind that it looked theatrical. "Stop fighting me," he told the wagon and the road and the moment. The black moved. 2 tendrils flicked out from his back with a shiver and wrapped the wagon frame in opposite directions. He felt the weight down the center of his chest like someone had hung a bell on his sternum. He pulled. The wagon lifted enough. Most people would have shouted it. Naruto didn't. He locked his hip, slid the colt sideways with his free hand, and let Tenten kick a chalk under the wheel at the exact breath it took to make ever. Yon around them think they'd rehearsed it. The bandits had planned terror and dust. They got a pivoting trio of kids who refused to be impressed. One tried to be clever, dropping from the rock wall with a spear aimed at Naruto's spine. Hinata didn't scream. She moved. Her palm met the spear just under the point and twisted. The spear went wide. Naruto felt the wind of it kiss his jacket. He didn't waste the help. He grabbed the shaft, hauled the man forward, and flicked him to the road with a force that popped dust like a drumbeat. "Today's special," Naruto told the man conversationally, "is not dying." Behind, Hinata warned. Not urgent, just accurate. The river carried a different sound for 1 heartbeat. Oars. Naruto glanced, saw 3 more bandits surfacing a skiff from a curtain of reeds. And knew they'd get behind the caravan in chassis lengths if he let them. He set his feet. The suit looked where he looked. His left hand flicked, a tendril thinned to a whip and snapped across the water. It hit the skiff's bow with a sticky wet thap and held. "Pull," Naruto said, which was a ridiculous instruction to give water, but he was Naruto. The river didn't obey him. The suit did. The line shortened, the skiff yawed, and a moment later the river taught 3 men what cold felt like on the inside. The smith's bell echoed down the road from the village that stood upwind. It was a nothing sound, just the noon ring to call workers to meal. Naruto's teeth clicked shut as if someone had slapped them together. Pain exploded in the soft places behind his ears and down his jaw. The Uit recoiled from his skin like a cat trying to get under a bed during thunder. Naruto didn't fall. He knelt because that's what you do when the ground changes shape too fast and you don't want to make it worse. His vision went spangled. The bandit in front of him blinked, recognized something like opportunity, and raised his spear again, confusion and fear dueling for space behind his eyes. Hinata's hand touched Naruto's shoulder. It was the kind of touch people make when they're sure you'll do the next thing right. She didn't drag at him. She counted softly, 1, 2, 3, and on 3 Naruto's breath fell into her number. The sound of the bell moved from the middle of his skull to the edge of the road, where it belonged. The spear dipped. Naruto caught the shaft between thumb and forefinger, smiled through residual bright pain, and shook his head at the man like a disappointed older brother. The man dropped the spear and bolted. Naruto let him go. Ears? Hinata asked quietly. Ringing some, Naruto admitted. Voice steadying. He rolled his neck, stood, and felt the suit slide back into place a fraction slower than before. I'm okay. Her Byakugan studied him, and he knew she wasn't looking at muscles. She was watching a new current flow under his skin. She didn't call it out. She backed him up without words by turning her body to shade his left and taking the next threat he didn't need to take. Tenten dropped beside them with the lazy grace of someone who could have arrived 2 seconds earlier and had decided against showing off. We're done here, she reported. That was either the worst ambush in the River Road's history or a trial run. We made it look like the first, Azumo said from behind a tree with a bandit gently asleep at his feet, by being impossible. Tenten's eyes cut to Naruto's right hand, where black had retreated but a sheen still clung to the skin like water that didn't like to evaporate. She didn't ask what it was. She held out a kunai that had caught a line of that residue when he'd grabbed it out of the air. The kunai's edge wore a gummy gloss. You drop a spool on the road? She asked, teasing light. Because whatever that is, it stretches like wire and hits like glue. I want 5 meters of it yesterday. Naruto blinked, surprised laughter catching him unguarded. If I can figure out how to roll it without it trying to roll me, you can have 10. Oh, good. She tucked the kunai into a side sleeve with the care she reserved for things that looked like fun and danger in equal measure. I'll keep shop open late. By the time the wagons were rolling again, the suit had settled into a hum that matched his pulse. The smith's bell didn't ring again. The world felt like a place he could talk to. Enko Mitarashi sauntered up the Roa. At sunset the way bad ideas often walk into bars. Comfortable, unapologetic, and smiling like she'd already won a bet. She looked him up and down, wiped a hand across her cheek to smear some dust on purpose, and flicked a senbon at his ear without warning. Naruto didn't think. The suit did. A thin black lip brushed his cheekbone and he tilted a fraction. The senbon whisked past, snicked into the trunk of a birch, and sang there. Reflexes, Enko said approvingly. Not from the academy. Yours. Borrowed. Her eyes were amused, but he'd seen the angle of her shoulders when she'd thrown the needle. That had been a professional test. Not a joke. I'm full of surprises, Naruto said easily. Keep the ones that don't own you. She didn't soften the words, but she stood closer than suspicion needed. And her grin had more weather in it than a fox's. Hokage wants a rumor checked. I volunteered. I like weird children. I'm a joy, Naruto said gravely. Annoy, Enko corrected, and then flicked her fingers toward the road. Let me see you work. He didn't parade it for her. He did the normal things so well they looked like they had sharper edges, placing scouts where the turns were dishonest. Walking the riverside where you could throw yourself and one other person into water if everything went to hell, making the shy kid at wagon 3 laugh 3 times before the next mile marker. Enko watched without interrupting. Only when they were camped near a low stone bridge and the rich smell of stew made the road feel like home did she tag his blind side with a fainted step. A senbon glittered. He reached, caught it by the tail without looking. Her smile tucked itself up a degree at the corner. Respect, she said, as if she were handing him a slip of paper. Right back, he said. After dark, he took the long way to the tavern roof because roofs tell you things roads don't. The suit liked height. He found himself stepping into the air where the lintels had shadows as if his feet had discovered new ledges. Konoha sprawled past the edge of the village like a rumor of warmth. This little place in front of him did its best to be its own world. 3 lanterns, a dog sleeping in the door of the carpenter's. A bell tower asking to be rung tomorrow. Hinata found him because Hinata always found the quiet corners and the people who needed them. She offered a rice bun with a shy tilt of wrist and sat without asking permission. The roof creaked its acceptance. They ate with their boots touching. I saw something, she said after a while. Around you. Like a veil. Naruto let the air rest before he answered. Is it ugly? She made a small, surprised face. No, it moves with your heart. Sounds inconvenient. It's alive. She looked at him with Byakugan off, just her. I am not afraid. He exhaled. The suit, for the first time since it had touched him, pressed toward her like a kid smelling kitchen cinnamon. It stopped when he didn't lean. It listened when he did. I think it wants to help, Naruto admitted. But bells hurt. Hinata's smile barely moved. We can count through bells. He huffed, which wasn't quite a laugh. Okay. They sat on the roof until dew found. Them and the lanterns gave up one by one. Somewhere a musician practiced a scale 3 notes too long. Hinata said goodnight like an assurance, not an exit. Naruto stayed a little longer and watched the bell tower. The suit watched with him. The night felt like a person trying to make up its mind. The canyon on the far side of the village was the kind you get when a river spends 100 years. Tell a hill what it really thinks. Narrow, stubborn, beautiful in a way that makes horses put their ears back. The caravan went through at dawn because you don't take that passage after lunch if you want to see dinner. They were 2 wagons in when the dust ahead wrong-footed itself. Naruto didn't wait. He didn't have time for a speech. He slid past the lead wheel, put 2 fingers to his lips, and cut a whistle that meant stop and trust me. The drivers trusted him because people often do when someone looks like he expects to be obeyed without being a jerk about it. The canyon's left wall spat 3 men and half a ladder. The right wall offered 2 more and a rope that wanted to be a noose for a wagon tongue. Above, a figure ran with bandit grace along a ledge barely thick enough for its shadow. Naruto read it in a flash. Not a massacre, a clean snatch and run for the small lockbox riding in the 3rd wagon. Bored professionals. Hinata, he said, eyes on high. Tenten, give me a bridge. On it, Tenten said. Her voice already smaller because she was already farther away. A coil of line spun from her hands and latched a grapnel onto an outcrop that would have made a mountain goat swear. She did not climb like a person. She climbed like a plan. The suit rolled over Naruto's shoulders with pleasure like ink finally finding the brush it wanted. 4 tendrils budded from his back, slimmer and cleaner than before. They tasted air and hard stone in little tasting flicks. He jumped. He shouldn't have been able to. The canyon was too wide for someone human to leap across in armor a smile and a disregard for ordinary. But he didn't leap as a person. He snapped a line at a ledge not thick enough to catch a shin. The line stuck the way a spider's argument about physics sticks. He swung. Dust flew into his teeth. He kept them closed and let the suit sheath his eyes just enough to turn grit into glitter. He landed on the ledge in front of the running bandit, took 2 slidden steps sideways to keep the dust from making him slip, and headbutted the man cleanly without anger. The man sat down as if reconsidering his trade. Below, a wagon jolted. A child screamed where a RP had slipped back and the world showed teeth. Naruto's stomach ignored gravity for a second. The suit felt his choice. It turned his body into an angle and a line and something that anchored. Hold, he told it, and it held. A tendon of black arced from his left shoulder to the canyon's opposite wall, sketched a web that wasn't there a breath ago, and tightened. He ran along it like a line only he could see. Left rope, Hinata called. She hadn't raised her voice, but he felt the sound as a warm hand in his back. He adjusted 1 step and cut the rope with a sweep that made the line practically do the work for him. Tenten's bridge was not a bridge in the way people think of bridges. It was 4 bolts and 6 lines and a willingness to pretend that made something capable of catching momentum. Naruto hit it, felt it sing like a bowstring, and aimed himself where everything would be worst without him. The lead bandit, older, scar where a blade had asked questions and never quite got an answer, had a boy tucked under his arm like a parcel. The boy had quiet bravery, He wasn't crying, just hanging on. The bandit's eyes clicked to Naruto as if tallying. Distance, speed, risk. Don't, Naruto advised, not unkind. The man threw the boy. Naruto didn't think. He stepped out into air and gave himself to whatever that black corded covenant was between his will and the suit. 2 lines fired in opposite directions, anchored to nothing that made sense and everything that did, and he became a pendulum, a curve, a catching pair of hands in a place where a person had no right to be. The boy hit his chest with a sound that hurt more than any bell. Naruto wrapped him, rolled in the scant space the canyon blessed him with, and used a tendril to kiss the canyon wall hard enough to steer them into the only open pocket between cart and rock. He landed on one knee, shoulders bowing to turn impact into an apology he would make to himself later. The boy clung for a heartbeat, then peeled back, eyes wide as morning. "You flew," he said, then seemed to consider, and adjusted. "We flew." "Looks like," Naruto said, and set him gently on his feet and turned because the bandit was running again. With a professional's ability to keep moving even when his plan looked stupid in the rearview. "You okay?" Azumo shouted from somewhere practical. "Tell you at lunch," Naruto called back, already moving. Hinata intercepted the scarred bandit 2 turns later by being where he had to go and not where he wanted. She didn't strike hard. She pressed his wrist in exactly the wrong place for wrists and blades, and his hand forgot how to hold. Tenten's line swept his ankles with surgical embarrassment. He hit dust one more time, looked up at Naruto coming in without rush, and decided to lie down before being asked. Sensible. It should have been over. It almost was. The canyon breathed out the way places do when conflict leaves them, and the wind moved on with a relieved shake. Naruto counted breaths, counted heads, counted the pieces of himself that still felt like him. The smith's bell at the village sounded again. Naruto saw it coming in the tiny flinch of the suit inside his skin, and he rode the wave instead of trying to brace. The sound rolled over him like light around the edge of a door. It still hurt. His teeth still clicked. He still turned his head toward Hinata because her count had been a better compass than his stubbornness. 1, 2, 3, she said softly. 4, 5, 6, he finished, matching, and in his peripheral he saw Tenten watch both of them, the little furrow of calculation between her brows smoothing out like thread pulled straight. Anko dropped into the canyon with the cheerful recklessness of someone who learned long ago that gravity is a suggestion if you know how to talk to it. She landed, bounced, and blew hair out of her eyes. "Well," she announced, "that was honest work. I'm bored. Someone make tea." "You can help push a wheel," Tenten suggested. "Captain, I'm allergic to wheels." Anko's gaze cut to Naruto. "You flew." "We flew," the boy near Naruto informed her, straight-faced, and then darted behind his mother's skirt with a dignity that made Naruto want to salute. Anko snorted. "Fine. You didn't die. Good job not dying. Hokage says we keep you alive and other people, too, while certain bells keep ringing. The way those bells made that thing under your skin twitch." She flicked 2 fingers at his shoulder without touching. "We're going to fix that." Naruto rolled his jaw, tasting iron. "I prefer not twitching," he allowed. "Excellent. Lesson 1. Anko held up a hand and snapped her fingers. The sound cracked sharply, and the suit's edges tightened against his ribs, not panic, just readiness. "Listen to the pain before it listens to you. And since I am a generous soul, I brought a present." She pulled a small cloth bundle from somewhere people shouldn't be able to store bundles, flipped it open, and revealed 3 tiny metal forks with stamps that looked like they had learned discipline and then went further than they wanted to. "Resonant toys. Tenten, try not to blow anything up. Naruto, we're going to teach whatever's inside you to step sideways when it hears this." Tenten plucked one with delicate fingers and held it up so the light found its edges. "I can tune this." The hunger in her voice made Naruto like her more. "Give me 2 days and a pile of scrap and I'll give you chime kunai that make these sing off key." Hinata's gaze flicked to Naruto's throat and back, as if measuring how far a promise can reach and still be kept. He shrugged the way people shrug when they can't promise winning but can promise showing up. Night rolled down the canyon like water, slow, full of quiet small lives. They brought the wagon out to the flat beyond, made a camp that smelled like cumin and onion, and hung the forks on a string like ugly wind chimes. Azumo wrote a report that would probably leave out everything important and include all the names. Naruto ate stew until the bowl felt lighter than it should. He talked with a woman who raised goats about goats and didn't make it about heroes. He let Tenten argue with Anko about harmonic dampeners and pretended he wasn't listening to every third word. Hinata drifted among the children like gravity that understood consent. Much later, alone except for night, Naruto found a water trough behind the tavern where horses had drunk and tired men had splashed their faces and kids had drawn fish with fingers. He crouched and watched his face settle in the water. It was his face. The old idiot grin softened by a season of feeling the village look at him like he was useful, eyes that had seen people and not just enemies. But around the edges where water meets air the was a thin meniscus of night that turned his reflection into a thing with two depths. He concentrated, and the shadow draped a lid over his right eye like a veil. Hungry? He asked quietly. This time, it answered. Not with words, but with a press of want that would have been terrifying if he'd never been poor and lonely and full of a different hunger. He recognized it. He understood it more than he wished he did. Then learn to be hungry for the right things, he said. The shadow trembled across his cheek like a cat that had considered biting but chose to rub instead. Under the trough, something very small and very red flicked across the breath-thin layer where water meets wood and was gone down a crack. If he noticed, he didn't say. He stood, rolled his shoulders, and felt every place the suit had decided to be loyal. He felt the bell tower on the hill like a cough behind the house. A figure watched it, high up where the road widened next to the smithy. The white robe could have been anyone's. The plain mask exactly the kind you buy when you don't want to be remembered. The figure held a tuning fork between thumb and forefinger, not quite touching, feeling vibration as if it were just a creature with odd hobbies. The fork sang a note too soft for most ears. The night flinched. Naruto's skin shivered the way skin does when a truth walks through a room. He looked at the hill. The figure tilted the fork, made a second note that tasted like cold iron, and smiled in the small way people smile when a plan makes them feel smart. In the courtyard by the trough, Naruto frowned just enough to be honest. The suit slid over his knuckles very slightly, like a friend adjusting the grip it might need later. Come on, he told the dark, and felt it want to. On the roof, Hinata stood alone for a moment and traced her index finger along the railing. She looked out at the bell tower without Byakugan, eyes ordinary and brave. When she turned away, she walked like a person who had decided not to be afraid of the shape of what comes next. Somewhere below, in a room where no one ate because it wasn't a restaurant anymore, Tenten laid out a tuning fork on a cloth, took it apart into exactly too many pieces, and started to laugh under her breath because the problem was just stupid enough to be fun. Anko propped her feet on a chair and watched the door, waiting for trouble like most people wait for dessert. She flicked a coin. It came up heads 3 times in a row and once with the noise a bell makes when you touch it with a thumb that isn't quite clean. Naruto lay on his CK on the bare boards of the tavern room and stared at the ceiling until the knots made constellations that didn't exist. The suit breathed with him. It had no lungs. He decided not to find that weird and was mostly successful. The bell tower slept, the way tools sleep. The figure with the mask did not. He turned his fork gently once more and made another note so thin it was more idea than sound. The shadow around Naruto's heart pulled tight for 1 second, like string across a bow. Okay, Naruto said to the dark. Let's learn to dance. The night agreed. Chapter 1 end. Chapter 2. Forest that hears your heart. The written exam smelled like ink, fear, and bored authority. Rows of candidates hunched over papers in the academy hall while proctors drifted like slow knives. The ceiling fans clicked on a rhythm a little too proud of itself. Naruto tapped his eraser once, twice, then flattened his palm and let the black under his skin slip up to the knuckles just enough to feel the draft. He didn't cheat, not in the way the proctors were looking for. He listened. The paper questions were elaborate jokes wrapped in yield signs. Most of the room had already figured out the real test. Find answer without getting caught finding the answer. Naruto found a different one. He watched the way the proctors' eyes bounced, how they turned at corners, where silence pooled like water. He moved his pencil when they moved their heads. Not because he needed to hide, but because he wanted to know the room would let him. On the row to his left, Tenten's mouth made a small, frustrated line as her hand hovered over a diagram of knotwork and leverage. She didn't look up. He didn't either. The suit unrolled a hair-thin filament along the underside of his desk like a spider being careful, snicked it to hers, and held still. It wasn't a note. It was a tug. 2 beats to mean, answers the left-hand turn. Her knuckle tapped the filament back. 1 beat. Got it. He grinned, small. The filament drew back like a tide. Across the room, Hinata's shoulders were relaxed in that way that meant she was working hard. She had a habit of breathing slow when other people panicked. Naruto watched 3 cheaters try to use her calm for cover. He angled his body a fraction. The suit's edge gave a tiny twitch, just enough to make the nearest proctor glance up at a shadow that didn't belong. The cheaters redirected their courage elsewhere. When the last sheet was collected, the room breathed like a patient who'd decided to live. Naruto rolled his pencil between finger and thumb. Anko drifted past in proctor black and fishnet. Eyes bright with the kind of amusement that means someone has found an interesting wire and can't wait to pluck it. You look like you didn't copy a thing, she murmured. I like my answers weird. He murmured back. Keep that, she said, and the corner of her mouth ticked. Forest next. Try not to die. The briefing outside Training Ground 44 was a theater with better lighting than the academy. The gate was a mouth. The fence was teeth. The sign warned about violence the way ocean signs warn about rip tides, truth told like a joke so only the right people laugh. Anko loved this place. It was obvious in her posture. 2 scrolls, she said, voice carrying without shouting. Heaven and earth. Get both. Get to the tower. 5 days. If you die, have the decency to make it interesting. She tossed bundles with the easy arm of someone who didn't worry about dropping things. Naruto caught one without looking. Team placements blurred at the edges, the exam. Didn't care what names sat in what boxes. Kiba barked a laugh at something no one else heard. Shikamaru yawned like a prayer. Tamari from Suna leaned on her fan as if it had already cut someone's thr. Oat today and would not object to a second. Hinata fell in beside Naruto without effort. Tenten drifted in with the gravity of a person who naturally ends up near where things get done. Anko finished her talk with a grin sharp enough to be a lesson and opened the gates with a flourish only she could get away with. The forest of death swallowed the line of genin like a trick of perspective. The Saint 100 meters were air and green and the quiet ticking of insect lives. Then the forest remembered what it was. Sound did weird things here. Leaves hissed in one place and kept hissing 2 trees away. The ground chose its own moments to be solid. Naruto let the suit bleed into high calves and feet until each step tasted the ground before it landed. Map as we go, he said, low. Not on paper, on habits. Tenten's grin flashed. I like the way you scout. Hinata blinked like a cat in sunlight. Wind pulls left for a quarter length, she said. Something rotted on the right. 3 chakra signatures ahead, low and wide, bore. Or people pretending to be bore badly. Bad bores, Naruto decided. We angle. They angled. At a tangle of vines pretending to be a path, Naruto went up instead of around. The suit loved it. It made handholds where there weren't any, taking the weight on lines no one else could see. The canopy was a second forest with different rules. Naruto's balanced the line bet. Ween showing off and saving time by defaulting to saving time. He found the first scroll cache by accident, which is to say he found it the way he found most things he wanted, by paying attention while needing something else. The air ahead went a little thinner, oxygen had a tone. He stopped. Hinata drifted to his shoulder, turned her gaze, and frowned. There are bells under the leaf litter, she said. Voice almost too soft to be a sound. Not on strings. In the ground. They hum. He heard it when she said it. Not the bells themselves, but the lack around them, a clean bowl where sound tried not to go. Tenten crouched and slipped a thin splinter of steel under a patch of moss, teased it up with a tenderness most people reserve for newborn kittens or freshly honed edges. Pretty, she murmured. Tiny bronze cups slept under the green, stamped with the brutal precision of people who did not make art unless it killed something. Not ours. Choir? Naruto asked. He kept his mouth flat when he used the name. He didn't want to give it teeth. Feels like it, Anko said from the shade under a tree she hadn't been standing under a second ago. She had a gift for arriving where she wasn't. Hey, like pure notes and people who think they're uncorruptible. Less sense of humor than priests. More knives. Naruto took the long breath that makes bravery practical. We can walk through this if we step where it's wrong. Hinata tilted her head, listening for something that wasn't noise. Wider gaps at, she pointed. There. Tenten nodded, already moving 3 flags in her head. I can throw you 2 anchors. She said, if you can stick webs to nothing. Naruto didn't bother to explain that nothing was where his life tended to be. He flicked a line to a gnarled branch that looked reluctant to join the team and made it agree by existing in the right shape near it. He flicked another to a stone face 6 meters out that pretended to be smooth. The lines hummed. The suit watched its own enemies for a beat and then stepped to the side of the song. On you, he said. They crossed like the point of a knife draws through silk. One bell chimed a warning note when Naruto's F boot put half a gram too much love on the wrong patch of moss. He shifted his weight into his hips. Hinata steadied his wrist with the lightest of touches. Tenten flicked a kunai that landed in axe soil with a thup exactly loud enough to change the air pressure. The warning note softened. The forest decided to grant them another breath. At the center of the humming ring sat a cheap wooden bow. That wanted very much to be a treasure. Tenten opened it with an almost affectionate impatience. Bait, she said flatly. Naruto didn't need convincing. We don't take it, he said. We make someone else take it in the direction we want. Quote, Anko's teeth flashed. Now you're speaking my language. They backed out the way dancers leave a stage they liked. Careful, grateful, facing forward. The first ambush came fast enough to be a courtesy. 3 sound genin, all elbows and attitude, slid out of the green with the sleepy bravado of people who had never bled long enough to learn new humility. The tall one had a metal tube strapped to his forearm with strings and seals tattooed into the skin underneath, music as weapon. The girl carried a ring of hollow bells at her hip like jewelry that wanted to hurt someone. The third had a smile that apologized for nothing. Trade your scroll, the tall one said, for your bones. Your line delivery needs work, Naruto said, polite. I can workshop it with you if we all survive. The tall one twitched the tube. Air went hard. Naruto's suit tried to recoil the way it had the first time the bell hit him. Naruto didn't let it. He set his feet and the hurt like he'd learned to do. He counted. Hinata's hand brushed his shoulder. 1, 2, 3. His pulse answered. 4, 5, 6. Tenten threw a chime she'd tuned last night by lantern light. It's linked against the tube and made the wrong note on purpose. The wrong note was everything. The air softened for a breath. Naruto broke the line, not with speed but with angle. He slid in under the sure like a person slipping through closing doors and tapped the tall one's wrist with 2 fingers. The man's hand forgot how to hold his own sound. A tendril snapped out from Naruto's shoulder, snagged the girl's bell ring, yanked it off, and slapped it into wet swamp. The third smile disappeared when Hinata put 2 knuckles under his elbow and made it stop being an elbow for a while. You set the bells in the ground? Naruto asked, because curiosity was a kind of dominance. The tall one spat a taste of pride. We're not with the choir. Ah, Anko said cheerfully, stepping out of a bush she shouldn't have fit inside. Then you've picked a very loud hobby in a very wrong neighborhood. The third genin made a noise like a person who'd just realized his options were run, and run uglier. They chose uglier. Tenten sighed, fawned, put upon, and put a line across his ankles to save him from himself. Hinata's palm stopped the tall one's tube from finding air again. Naruto held up both hands like a host guiding guests out a door after an awkward dinner that could have been a brawl. Leave the bells, he said. Keep your bones. They ran, graceless and alive. The forest let them. The sky had decayed to a dim green when the snake arrived. It didn't hiss. It didn't need to. The air changed temperature. Naruto's suit lifted, alert, the way hair rises on forearms when the weather shifts. He didn't turn. He let his eyes go loose and counted backward from 7 because Kurama liked counting and counted better backward. The snake struck for the hollow under his ear. Naruto's hand was already there. Black flowed over his palm and fingers, catching scale and pushing. The snake's head twisted, jaws spread, fangs kissed air where his neck had been, and then it recoiled back past the hand that had thrown it. The hand was white. The nails were clean. The sleeve was wrong for this forest and right for the man, like the forest could have changed clothes if he'd asked it to. Orochi. Tenten started, then thought better of saying a god's name in a place that took names seriously. Orochimaru smiled in that way that people who are too smart for their own lives smile when something truly new presents itself. He didn't announce himself. He took Naruto in from eyes to stance like a surgeon mapping an incision. Then his gaze flicked, and Naruto felt it land, not on him, but on the thing under his skin. Interesting, Orochimaru said softly, as if complimenting a craftsman's hinge. What did you bring home from a place that doesn't like to share? Naruto didn't give him the satisfaction of a wince. A better question, he said, is what it brought home when it chose me. Orochimaru's smile had tired edges. Brave, or rehearsed, or both. 2 snakes spilled from his sleeves and arrowed toward Naruto's kidneys. Because competence prefers unglamorous targets. Naruto's suit flared darker, bracing the places that mattered, but he didn't rely on it. He moved, small, efficient steps that changed lines, not just speed, and brought a forearm down on one snake's jaw with enough contempt to crack a fang. Hinata slid into the other's path and turned its head with a tap that made it forget it wanted to bite at all. Anko came out of the trees like a memory of a fight from 10 years ago that had never ended. Her knife stopped at Orochimaru's throat without quite being at his throat. "Leave my kids alone," she said, and didn't pretend she meant it as anything other than a threat. Orochimaru's eyes flicked to Anko's. There was history there, and for 2 breaths the forest had to lean in, rude and fascinated. Then he laughed, soft, and stepped back in that way only people who are very good at leaving manage. "We'll talk later," he told Naruto, as if he were scheduling a dinner. "Make sure you keep listening. I do admire listeners." He left through the ground more than the path. The earth made room for him with the politeness of a host terrified of its guest. Anko breathed out between her teeth, slow. "If you see him again, throw something heavy and then run," she advised, very calmly. "Preferably a building." Naruto nodded, equally calm, even as the suit hissed along his BS like a kettle just thinking about boiling. He started to say something glib to bleed the fear out of it, then halted, because the air had flipped, not its temperature but its intention. The hum wasn't bells this time. It was what bells leave behind when they go quiet. Masks stepped out from behind trunks, plain white, eyes dark. They didn't wear village symbols. They wore a quiet that had been taught to stand up straight. The choir of silence did not announce itself the way bandits do. It was there and then it was nearer, and then the ground sang wrong under Naruto's feet. "Host," said the man in front. He wore no insignia, but his stance expected the world to move out of his way. A fork rested in his hand, not as a tool but as a credential. "You will come." Anko's knife tilted. "Or," she suggested, "you could go home and wonder what you almost did." The man turned his head slightly. It was not contempt. It was recognition without regard. "Mitarashi," he said as if he'd found an old stain on a shirt he liked. "You persist." Quote, "And you," Anko said, "still buy your masks in bulk." The man lifted the fork and touched it to his other palm. The note was small and precise and very polite. Naruto's suit tightened so fast his breath snagged. The figure raised his other hand and the forest answered with 3 more forks, not held but planted. Slim metal posts tucked into root shadows, the NES trained along them to hide their shapes. A lattice knit out from them, too thin to see and too heavy to ignore, dropping over Naruto like a curtain designed by someone who hated color and joy. Hinata was already moving. Tenten had a chime in her fingers. Anko took a step that promised a lot of mess and bite. Naruto's ears rang needles. The suit tried to turtle. He made it look up instead. He didn't ask it to be brave. He set his jaw and counted back into Hinata's voice. 1, Hinata said, somewhere in the white noise. 2, Naruto answered, even if his throat had to work harder to find it. Tenten let the chime fall on a rhythm Hinata set. The chime answered the fork, not with agreement but with a shrug. A half beat of relief opened under Naruto's feet. He lunged at it, turned a step into a leap, hit the lattice hard enough to make it quiver, and felt his teeth ache from the wrongness. He grinned anyway because grinning is sometimes how you tell your body what to do next. The man with the fork, Sub-Cantor Renga. The suit decided to name him for Naruto because names make aiming easier, shifted his grip minuscule degrees and the cage slammed shut again. Naruto hit, rolled, and up bleeding from his ears with the kind of smile that made enemies stop checking for your limits and start checking for exits. Bad net, he said. Good enough, Renga said, and twitched the fork. NKO threw herself at one of the planted posts with obscene enthusiasm. Her knife bit, skittered, bit again. Tenten's second chime kissed the base at a bad angle and made the note go purple in a way color shouldn't be able to do to sound. The post spasmed. Hinata slid under a mosque's guard and struck a wrist at a nerve that had names in 3 scrolls and 1 bedtime story. Fingers opened. The mosque's fork fell. Naruto snapped a tendril and flung it into the brush. The lattice tore. Not entirely. Enough. Naruto took that space like he took oxygen. He slung a line high, yanked himself up through the worst of the note, and landed outside the shape of the cage, just far enough to feel the suit breathe again. He didn't stop moving. He went for Renga because leaders wear their weight like a bruise. Renga met him with a blade of air so narrow it was almost a concept. Naruto ducked and felt it shave a breath of hair from his scalp. He laughed, short, delighted, terrified, and banged his own hand against his ribs to reset the suit's attention. Your hunger is misgoverned, Renga said, and he made it sound like he was scolding a student for using the wrong pen. I'm governing it, Naruto said, D drove his shoulder into the man's center line. It was not elegant. It didn't need to be. Renga went back a step and then another, surprise registering as one raised brow behind cloth. Naruto kept PR'ing until feet found a root and his balance found a new story. The suit sent 2 tendrils low and wide to take out the ideas of ankles among Renga's support. That bought 3 heartbeats. In a fight measured in sound, that was an hour. Masks closed in. Anko became the small, hard fire of a person who had sworn a long time ago to be the thing that bites back first. Hinata moved like water deciding to be a knife. Tenten threw a chime that shattered on a post and then 2 more that didn't, because learning fast is a kind of violence. The lattice kept trying to fall, and they kept teaching it gravity was optional. Renga pivoted, ears bleeding a little now himself. For the first time, something that might have been respect passed through his posture. He snapped the fork in a motion so subtle, only people watching his hands would have noticed. The note he made this time wasn't loud. It was correct. The world leaned toward it like a dog to a master. Naruto's suit screamed. He reached instinctively for the bell tower in his head, Hinata's count, but there was no tower here. There were trees, and the smell of damp rot, and his friend's feet finding earth, and someone needing him in 3 directions. He grabbed that instead. He didn't ask to be strong. He pulled the lattice into his chest and dared it to misjudge him. It worked the way bleeding sometimes works. Not pretty enough. The note went brittle. Naruto pushed through before it remembered itself. He got a hand on Renga's shoulder and squeezed hard enough to remind bones they belonged to a body. The fork dipped. Take him, Ask barked from behind. First words anyone but Renga had offered. A half circle shifted to sweep Naruto, legs. Hinata ghosted into that space and stole the sweep. Tenten's line snagged a wrist. Ankola, like a knife thrown into a table edge. The forest, indifferent and entertained, kept breathing. Retreat, Renga said, lightly, not because he was frightened but because he had a clock somewhere other people couldn't see. He touched the fork once more, not to sing but to call. The posts sank into the soil, vines curling over them as if embarrassed to be left exposed. Masks vanished into like ideas you later realize were the wrong ones. Anko let her knife hang and breathed out the way a person does after yanking someone else out of a river. I hate that they get to walk, she said, voice tight with honesty. Naruto wiped blood from his upper lip with the back of his hand. They walked because we made it too expensive to stay, he said. We'll invoice them later. Tenten W.S. Alred, why digging one of the posts out with a ruthlessness that suggested affection. I'm building a counter, she announced. And when I'm done I'm naming it something childish on purpose. Hinata moved close without making a ceremony out of it and pressed 2 fingers just under Naruto's ear. The pain sighed. He looked at her. The suit softened under her touch the way bark does when you remember trees are alive. You held, she said simply. I had a good metronome, he said. She flushed, pleased, and didn't apologize for it. They made the tower by nightfall 2 days later by surviving every small lie the forest told them. Somewhere in there, Naruto and Temari nearly cut each other in half before they both recognized useful people when they saw them. It was at a stream crossing where the water mad. Sound a water that thin shouldn't make. Naruto went for a line that looked like rock and found wind. Temari's fan-fold flash caught him mid-slip and put him down on the bank without fuss. He looked up at her as if she hadn't just saved him from looking stupid in a way that hurts. Thanks, he said. You're loud, she said, evaluating. And you make less noise than you should. Wind carries, he said, nodding to her fan. Loud can help if it's honest. Don't lecture me about wind, she said, but there was no heat in it. Her eyes tracked the lines he'd anchored into the trees and then the 2 he hadn't. The intentional gaps that told the map where to go if the map was lost. You anchor like someone who's fallen and hated it. He smiled. Once or twice. Gaara watched them from the off. Our bank with eyes like a god who wasn't sure he wanted disciples anymore. Temari's mouth compressed. Naruto didn't ask. Respect doesn't need biography. They moved together for a while because the path ahead was ugly in a way that taught even proud countries to share. Temari read the dunes of leaves like they were text. Naruto set lines in air and shadow and somewhere memory adjacent. When a gust rolled in hard and wrong, Temari cut it. Naruto caught it, and Hinata walked them through its absence. Renga will be at the tower, Anko said lightly, knife bouncing against her thigh. He'll want to pretend to negotiate. He'll try a more expensive net. He might bring a present. What kind? Naruto asked. The kind that leaves a stain, she said, eyes flicking to his sleeve as if she'd already seen it there. He didn't notice the red then. He wouldn't until later. The tower's clearing was a trap without the decency to hide. Naruto felt the hairs on his forearms say so. Bells had been sunk into the ground here, too, but smarter. Deeper. The silence was cleaner. Voices sounded like they belonged to other people. Renga stood a polite distance from the door with 2 masks and a lattice kit half assembled at his feet. He had the expression of a man waiting for a bus he didn't intend to ride. Host, he said by way of greeting. Fork, Naruto said back, because names are negotiations. Renga's eyes narrowed a fraction. Sub-canter, he corrected. Not offense, just the tidying instinct of a person who needs things placed. You have been warned. Consider us warned, Naruto said. We're still walking. Renga lifted his fork and tapped it on his palm. The note was so small Naruto felt it as a change in pressure rather than sound. The suit twitched. Behind Naruto, Tenten's chime sang the wrong note back. And Hinata's breath counted. The lattice posts hummed, almost thrilled to be useful. The first mask stepped in and reached for Naruto with a slick of wire meant to catch on anything that moved like a limb. Naruto let it wrap, then set his weight low and yanked the mask off her feet with insultingly little effort. He didn't hurt her on purpose. He webbed her fork to the grass and let her choose whether to give up with dignity or without. Renga moved in, fast, precise, the fork raking the air in cuts that had no weight and all of it. Naruto met him with a kind of patience that made sweat find his spine. He ducked one, rolled under another, used a tendril to steal a post and stab it into a third location Tenten had flagged with a flick of her eyes and a twitch of her wrist. Air went wrong in a way Renga hadn't planned on. He recovered with weary competence. You learn, he said. It's the one thing I'm good at, Naruto answered, and meant it. The fight collapsed into a knot of angles and breath. Temari did not wade in. She leaned, watching wind and weight, and when Hinata needed a heartbeat she gave it by dropping air where a mask was about to step. Anko ducked so, mething that would have ruined her ear and cackled like someone finding a beloved knife in an old coat pocket. Renga flicked the fork one last time, a tiny gesture with a huge intent. The lattice posts all chimed together. Naruto's teeth tried to leave his mouth by growing taller. The suit thrashed. He staggered, and then didn't. He grabbed the nearest shelf of air the way swimmers grab the edge of a pool to rest and pulled. It had no right to work. It did anyway because he believed it hard enough that the suit believed it with him. He yanked himself sideways through a space no one else could and landed where Renga hadn't left himself an answer. He didn't kill him. He pressed him into a pillar with a forearm across the chest and his other hand flat to the fork wrist and looked him in the eye. "Stop ringing bells in my friends," he said. "You can hate gods without breaking people." Something flickered in Renga's gaze, a small respect like a pencil mark in a ledger. He let the fork hand go open. "You have an appointment in the desert," he said. "You will keep it. We'll bring snacks," Anko said behind Naruto's shoulder, and gently relieved Renga of his fork like a hostess taking a coat. They let the choir leave again because the alternatives were worse and louder and would have eaten the day. Naruto unclenched his jaw and breathed around the ache in his bones. Hinata touched the pulse under his ear again without asking. He relaxed into her count before he knew he'd done it. The tower gave them a night that wasn't peace but pretended hard enough to pass. They slept on the floor in a line like children at a festival. Outside, the forest hissed and forgot them for a while. Naruto dreamed water, not the ocean this time, and not the damp of the forest. A tunnel. Stone wept. Lamps had been forgotten without being extinguished. The place inside him where he used to meet Kurama, the pipe crossroads, the old floodlit sewer, echoed with a different rhythm. The black suit sat on the water the way oil does when it refuses to sink and refuses to say why. A sound came, not bell, not fork. A knock, cheerful, impatient, like a friend at a door that had never had one before. "Don't," the black said without saying, rising on itself in a spill that tried to look bigger than it was. Naruto stood barefoot on the wet stone and looked at the gate where he'd seen iron bars years ago. They were open now, because he had opened them himself. Beyond, the corridor was dark and not. A laugh rolled up it, light and wrong. The red that came with it wasn't a color so much as an appetite. "Let me in," the red sing-songed without words. "We can do fun." Kurama's eyes opened in a shape far back in the dark, all ember and grin. "Careful, cub," he said, the voice full of old desert and warm fur. "Not every door is a friend just because it knocks with a smile." Naruto didn't step forward. He didn't step back. He folded his arms. "Rules," he said, and his voice filled the old tunnel better than bells ever had. "We protect first. We don't eat people. We keep our promises." The red pressed up against the invisible line with glee. It wanted to bite the rules to see if they bled. It wanted to swallow the rules and spit out knives. It wanted to be invited. "Fun," it urged. "Fun, fun, fun." Ooned his ankles, ready to be jealous, ready to be afraid. Kurama's laugh literally rolled in the water, rippling into rings. "You can stay," Naruto said, surprising himself by being certain. "If you protect who I protect. If you listen when I say stop. If you take my word like breath." The red stilled, slowly. It made a shape that could be a hand if hands were blades. It tapped the edge of the invitation the way a cat taps a pond. Then it withdrew, only a finger width, because there is a joy. Only predators know when prey talks back with teeth. Later, the red seemed to say. It knocked one more time, playful, promising, and slipped along the edge of the dark like paint poured on glass. The black settled. It didn't apologize. It didn't have to. Naruto turned and found Kurama looking at him the way old teachers look at students they didn't expect to like and do. "You've started collecting strays," the fox rumbled. "Try not to turn your heart into a kennel." Naruto smiled. Too late. Kurama showed a lot of teeth. Then be the one who teaches them not to bite. When Naruto woke, Dawn had scrubbed the world clean. Tenten snored unashamedly. Anko had a fork tucked under her cheekbone like a lover. Hinata slept with her hand near Naruto's sleeve, not touching, close enough that the suit made a small, contented hum. Temari stood in the door, watching the light argue with trees, fan closed in her grip like a judgment she would deliver later. Naruto flexed his fingers. Something sticky tugged at the cuff of his jacket. A thread of red thinner than hair lay there, bright as cut fruit, then soaked into the fabric as if shy. He filed that in the drawer labeled, "Deal with soon." There were other drawers. There were always other drawers. "Desert next," Temari said without turning, reading the day the way wind reads flags. After we get the second scroll, Naruto said, standing. After you wash your sleeve, Anko said. Eyes slitting open, voice a knife's laugh. You've been to a party, and the guest list just got worse. Naruto looked at his team, his not team, his people. He felt the forest listening. He felt the black in his blood listening. He thought, with a clarity that made him grin, that he liked his odds better now than he had yesterday. All right, he told the day. Let's go pick a fight the right size. Quote, somewhere far away, in a part of the sky no one had domesticated, a star turned its face as if it had remembered a name. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Crimson during the fall. The stadium made a sound like summer trying to remember winter. Dust hung in sunlight, drifting through the carved stone bowl in lazy blurs. Vendors hawked roasted chestnuts and flat bread. Children argued about who would win the next match, and 1,000 conversations braided into something like courage. Naruto stood at the railing and let himself enjoy it. He wore his orange jacket open and his grin quiet. The black under his skin sat like calm water, listening to his pulse, offering nothing unless he reached for it. Try not to wave at the crowd, Tenten said, bumping his shoulder. They'll think you're courting sponsors. I'll wave at money if it's throwing itself at me, he replied. Hinata stood on his other side, hands folded, gaze somewhere between the ring and the sky. Your heartbeat is slow, she murmured. A small smile threatening to happen. Trying a new thing. He took a breath that made room for the next one. So far I like it. He did a walk of the edge, mapping exits. Counting shinobi who mattered in a pinch. The Anbu with the lazy stance that meant he'd kill fast. The Suna Jonin with a fan at her hip pretending not to be Temari's aunt, a man in plain CL. Offs who never looked up but had the posture of someone measuring angles. Naruto's jaw tightened a fraction. The suit felt the shift and nudged his ribs like a friend telling him he'd said the quiet part out loud. Anko padded up behind them, chewing on something sweet she'd liberated from 2 inattentive vendors who would later compare notes and conclude a raccoon had robbed them. You have 3 watchers from whatever choir we irritated, she said casually, not pointing. One near the south stairs. One with a book he isn't reading, north shade. One in a hat that thinks being plain means invisible. Try to look like you don't care. I care, Naruto said. Good, Anko replied. Don't let them feel it. The match boards flickered. Names slid into place like knives into slots. Naruto's heart smiled at the one that snapped next to his. A boy from stone whose headband had been scrubbed clean so hard the metal shone like a dare. Not Neji. Not Kiba. Different rhythm. Different problems. Good. Naruto didn't want to replay a script everyone had already memorized. He wanted a fight that rode itself at speed. He stepped into the ring when called. Heat rose from the packed dirt. The crowd swelled and then swallowed its own noise. The referee's hand dropped. Naruto didn't change shape all at once. He rolled his shoulders and let the suit slip down his arms, not the full armor, just a Seikon. D-skin that sharpened his balance and softened his edges. Black slicked his knuckles and wrists. The tendrils kneaded the air like a cat testing a shelf before trusting it. People saw, and the sound Hey made wasn't a gasp. It was the inhale people do in a theater when the set piece they didn't know they were waiting for begins to move. His opponent came in clean, a faint high, true cut low. Naruto flowed past it without fanfare. No fancy flip, no grenade of chakra. He took a wrist at the exact wrong moment and turned the entire line of the boy's arm into a suggestion to fall. The kid fell, rolled, came up embarrassed. Naruto gave him a nod that meant you're better than that and invited him to prove it. They went for 2 minutes that felt like 10, each exchange a sentence that didn't waste a word. Naruto learned the boy's tells and the boy learned he couldn't find Naruto's. Twice Naruto could have made it ugly, and twice he didn't. He landed a palm on sternum at the perfect angle, pulled the force, and let the kid sit down with dignity. He accepted the bow with no victory theater. The proctor called it. The crowd applauded in that quiet way good audiences do when they feel seen. Up by the north shade, a man in a hat the color of nothing tilted his head half a degree. Naruto felt the look like a hangnail. He went to the rail, to Hinata's small smile and Tenten's bright eyes and Anko's too easy lean. And he told his breath to stay honest. The suit hummed back at him like a tuning fork lowered into warm water. Tamari passed behind them on the way to the competitor's entrance. She didn't stop. She didn't need to. Your restraint reads louder than your noise, she said, the words a brush of wind. Keep it. You keep your brother from breaking a stadium, Naruto answered, just as soft. That depends whether anyone asks him to, she said, and went below. The next match lasted as long as a storm. Sand rose where Gaara walked, his eyes half-lidded like a god who hated being awake. Naruto felt the crowd go eager and then wary and then silent. Fear makes fewer jokes when it has a face. The suit shifted inside him, black not afraid of sand, red watching, curious, wanting to see if sand bled. Noise toppled from the top of the village like a tower of plates blown over by a rude child. It wasn't sound, not at first. It was everything wrong at once. A scream from a street too far away to be part of the show. A hiss of chakra that didn't belong to any village that had paid for a flag here. The stiffening of the Anbu who had been leaning like men in a story who know when a story ends. Then paper bombs bloomed like off-season flowers. The sky filled with things that weren't birds. The invasion didn't begin. It unfolded, like someone pulling a cloth off a table and all the silver sliding to the floor. Naruto moved before the first shout had a nom. He hopped the rail, caught the lip of the wall, and let the suit catch him further than iron could. He landed by the tunnel mouths where civilians had already started to run. He clapped his hands once because people listen to noise when they can't hear sense. North tunnels, he said, pointing. Move. Don't look back. If you lose your child, do not stop in the gap. Get to the bell tower and scream their name at a grown-up with a clipboard. Clipboard, Enko repeated, appearing at his shoulder because that's what she did. A grim little smile stealing across her mouth. Good idea. She turned, yelled at a Chunin who looked like a substitute teacher on his best day, and shoved him toward a bell rope. Congratulations, you're in charge of names. Tenten was already moving boxes into barricades like a woman rearranging a shop for a sale, except everything she set down would be a problem for someone cruel in 30 seconds. Hinata took 3 children by their hands and put them in a line that happened to run behind cover the whole way to the stairs. Naruto turned his face toward the sandstorm building where Gaara stood and toward the thin scream under everything that meant something worse than sand was getting out of bed. Tamari leapt from the competitor's tunnel and landed in front of him with fan open. Her eyes were a plan. You won't like where he's going, she said. I won't like where he's left, he said. They looked at each other over that shared ugliness and decided to spend themselves where the why could do the most good without needing to say it. Take my wind, she said. Take my lines, he said. They ran. Gaara's sand had that eerie courtesy it kept for him alone and nobody else. It moved like thought. It made bridges where there weren't any and closed doors that had never required keys. Naruto and Tamari raced on rooftops as the village below became a half-exploded puzzle box. Above a bathhouse, Naruto anchored a line to a bell tower with the kind of confidence that makes architecture try harder, snapped another to the top of an arch that wouldn't be there in 5 breaths, and swung. Tamari cut the wind into a clean tunnel with a single sideways stroke. He shot through it like a letter sent to the right address. He landed on a cornice that complained about promises, reset, and swung again. They reached the square where Gaara's sand had collected into a dumb mound pretending not to be hungry. The wind was wrong. The world had acquired edges it hadn't earned. Naruto's suit throbbed along his shoulder joints. Not afraid, but with the focused interest of a predator discovering a fence. Shukaku, Tamari said, sword on sheath quiet. Naruto didn't turn into anything larger than he was. He didn't let the red take his hands, not yet. He called black up his arm and let it sheath the small blue whorl that was his favorite stubborn truth. The Rasengan shivered against the slick K as if wind and water had agreed to speak a new dialect for a minute. He didn't shout its name. He drove it into sand. The world made a low sound like an old door giving up. Sand blew out and in at once. Naruto's shoulder screamed. The whorl bored into a cheek that was trying to be a monster's. It dented that cheek. Not much. Just enough to say hi. Gaara roared. It wasn't a human sound but it wasn't not. Tamari pulled air into something sharp and slammed it across the shape where a jaw wanted to be. The sand reared and chattered and failed to finish the thought it had begun. Something red fell out of the sky like a laugh that had been sharpened into a knife. He landed without bending his knees and grinned like glass. He was narrow, his eyes too bright, his mouth delighted to be brought to a place full of soft things. Red crawled up his elbows in delicate knives and dripped from his fingers like strings. He didn't smell like blood, he smelled like sugar left too long in summer. "Hello," he said to Naruto conversationally, as if they'd been trying to meet up for weeks and kept missing each other. "I'm Kasai. I heard you have something fun." Naruto didn't look away from Gaara Long N. Out to get the measure of Kasai properly, but one glance was enough to feel the red under his skin swarm to the surface and press its face to the glass. It recognized something in the man's grin. It recognized kin. It knocked with its knuckles like a child seeing a carnival. "Not now," Naruto told it without moving his lips. Kasai laughed like he'd heard him. "Oh, later," he promised, and flicked a blade at Naruto's shoulder. Playful and precise, Naruto twisted. The blade kissed fabric and would have kissed meat, but Hinata's voice lived in his muscles now and he moved a count sooner than he would have last month. He flowed past knife and into Kasai's arms like a dance that turns into a fight halfway through because someone wants it to. Kasai's red became a forest of bone-fine edges, blades growing like weeds. Then collapsing back into twitching strands. Naruto parried with lines and elbows and the unglamorous strength that lives in hips. They slid past each other on broken tiles and bedded gravel and the close, cruel air that happens when gods brush their teeth beside mortals and forget to wipe the mirror. On the square's far side, Tamari took a beat to read the wind moving through Gaara's sand and made an ugly calculation. "I can keep him occupied," she said into her half-bit lip. She popped the fan and yanked a sideways column of air into the sand's eyes. "I'll keep him from eating the stadium. You keep that twig from stabbing our city to ribbons." Naruto didn't nod because he couldn't afford not to watch Kasai's shoulders. Kasai smiled as if Naruto had told a superb joke in the wrong language flawlessly. "I like you," Kasai said brightly. "You do the thing where you save people and smile like you meant to be here." "You can try it," Naruto said, ducking a slice and using his momentum to plant a webbing line across Kasai's ankle. He yanked. Kasai cut the line on reflex, too pleased to be alive to be careful. "And miss the art of this," Kasai trilled. No, I have a bishopric to conduct." He flicked a needle of red like a wasp. Naruto swayed, too slow. The needle kissed his jacket sleeve, the exact place the hair-thin red had soaked in 2 nights ago. It sank like it had come home. The world tilted. He was in water again, except the water was mercury and his reflection refused to be his. The old sewer was gone. The Torii over an ocean had been dragged down into a half-lit tunnel where lamps burned with red hearts. The black he wore around his bones rose, bristling, as if it had a spine. The red stood on the other side of an idea and knocked with its curled knuckles with a glee so bright it made the dark look cautious. "Let me in," it sang without sound. "We can do fun." Kurama lounged on a broken arch above them like an emperor pretending not to be impressed. "If you invite one more tenant, cub," he drawled, "we'll have to start charging rent." "I'm negotiating," Naruto said, and surprised himself by being calm in a place that looked like tea had been set on fire and then told to remember being water. Kasai's laugh echoed down from somewhere that wasn't this room. Perhaps Mindscape bled both ways when knives knew your name. The red pressed, not hard. Flirtatious. Teeth smiling. It licked the line once with a thin ribbon that smelled like sugar and pennies. "Rules," Naruto said, and the echo in this place said his word mattered. "We protect first. We don't eat people. We keep my promises. If you don't like that, you don't get hands." The red shivered, delighted. "But we can stretch. On my count. We can sing. If I don't say stop." The black surged, jealous and loyal, trying to wrap Naruto in armor even here. He eased a palm down it. "We're not being replaced," he told it. "We're getting louder." Kurama laughed until the Torii shook. "He makes it sound easy," he said, amused and proud and old. The red reached a hand made of strands and knives and placed it against Naruto's palm. It was a horrible handshake. It was also honest. "Fun," said the red. "The way a fox says fox. Only the right kind." Naruto said, and gripped back. He blinked, and the square came roaring back with it. Kasai was much closer than polite. Naruto's shoulder stung where the needle had gone and wasn't anymore. The black threatened to buck. The red wanted to sprint. Naruto chose to move. He slid his right foot and threw his weight into a pivot. He'd stolen from a dancer on a tavern table 2 summers ago. He called up the whorl, blue and stubborn and and let the black sheath it like a glove. The red laughed and poured fractal edges through. The glove-like filigree being drawn through gold. The thing that spun in his hand wasn't a Rasengan, and it wasn't not. It snarled. It sang. It made the air around it step back. Kasai's eyes widen. In the honest astonishment of a man at the edge of a cliff discovering it's a beginning. Oh, he breathed. Yes. Naruto didn't answer. He stepped through the momentum and drove the crimson spiral into the sand giant's cheek and into Kasai's chest in one flowing motion. It was like putting a wheel into a wall and watching the wall forget what wall meant. Shukaku reeled and shed an avalanche at buried 3 rooftops and the remains of a baker's garden. Kasai went backwards with a delighted shout and met a wall with the sound brick makes when it learns it can bow. Naruto stood over him, chest heaving, ears ringing, shoulder torn. The red inside him hopped from foot to foot, asking for seconds. He told it to sit. It sat, vibrating. Kasai looked up at him with the face of a child caught after setting a field on fire and being more interested in the flames than punishment. His ribs had learned new shapes. His smile did not care. Kill me, he invited, as if offering a friend the last sweet at the bottom of a bag. No, Naruto said. He webbed Kasai's wrists to the wall and used a line to pull a roof beam down across the man's legs because experience tells you not to trust a smile. You're not the worst thing that happened today. And I don't make you simple for the choir. Kasai's laughter followed him 2 steps. Then let me be complicated later. Temari's wind screamed a warning. Naruto looked up and saw the sand trying to bear Gaara away along the back of a retreating wave, toward the trees, away from the village. He swung after, and Temari cut him an alley skyward. Hinata was already there at the base of a collapsed arch, binding a child's arm with a strip torn from her own sleeve while calling arrows for 2 Jonin who had no reason to trust her and did anyway. Go, she said without looking up. I'll be where you land. He went. The rooftops complained. The air tore. He caught up to Gaara on a stretch of tiles where the world had decided to give up and become rubble. Gaara turned, eyes empty of people and full of a beige hunger that had never learned a name. Naruto closed, planted both feet on a broken lintel, and slammed the crimson spiral's ghost into the sand's lip again. It cracked, not wide, but everyone in shouting distance heard it. The suit hissed triumph. The red giggled. Naruto leaned into that thin line where control and release kiss and kept his balance by thinking of Hinata's hand at his sleeve and Temari's impolite wind and Anko's knife that always knew where to be first. And then the city rang. Not bells. Bells would have been kindness. This was a note that started in the soft parts of stone and arrived in bones. 100 small forks hidden under eaves and flags and lintels sang together, and the air turned weighty with correctness. The suit slammed tight and tried to crawl out of him. Naruto's knees went clever and then dumb. He hit the tiles hard enough to taste clay. Subharmonic lattice, said a voice too calm for this much ruin. Naruto turned his head because he had to and saw a man standing on the bell tower platform 3 streets away, lifting a long fork from a cradle. He had neat hands and a neat mouth and eyes that praised good manners. The prime cantor, then. The kind of person who makes rules and never pays for them. Anko saw it, too. She saw the pattern. Where the hub must be, what needed to break, how much it would cost, and swore using words Naruto would remember for their economy later. She ran for the hub. 2 masks intercepted her with the grim relief of people who love their jobs because they always know what to do next. Tenten threw a chime at the nearest node from 50 meters away and hit a note Naruto had never heard on purpose. It did something. It wasn't enough. She swiped sweat and blood off her forehead and grabbed 3 more chimes because learning under fire is sometimes the only learning you get. Hinata shouted numbers and angles at a Jonin with a bow she'd never met. The Jonin's arrow at 30 degrees hit a glint under a thatch and took 1 post out of tune. The note staggered. Naruto's teeth unclenched for a breath. The prime cantor, Yatsu, Naruto decided. He looked like a Yatsu turned a wheel with his thumb and index finger. The note corrected itself as if embarrassed to have faltered. Naruto tried to stand and discovered his legs had been replaced with arguments. The black under his skin writhed like a rope too wet to tie. The red pressed its face to his collarbone and offered to bite through the problem. He told it no, roughed, and it sulked in a way that still breathed hunger. Anko reached the hub. She didn't slow. She threw herself at a pattern drawn in powdered stone and blood. She dragged her palm through it and swore in a way that was part prayer and part joke and part knife. The pattern stuttered. The village flinched. The lattice dropped half a span and hit the ground like tired rain. Naruto got to his feet by lying to gravity personally. He swung toward the bell tower. He didn't move like a hero. He moved like a problem that had developed wrists. He arrived at the base of the tower and took the stairs two at a time while the suit clung and hissed and snapped in confusion. Yatsu had no guard at the top. He had no need for one. He was the kind of man who brought the room with him. He held the fork in a casual grip and looked at Naruto with the concern of a tailor discovering an interesting stain on an otherwise good jacket. "Host," he said, not unkind. Naruto didn't answer. He fired a line that jammed the bell's clapper against its lips so hard it yelped. He ran at the man with a low center and a refusal to apologize. Yatsu flicked the fork. The cut that moved through the air was as thin as regret and just as sharp. Naruto ducked enough to keep his throat. His shoulder burned. He rolled and grabbed a shelf full of ceremony bells the size of tea bowls and yanked. They tumbled, clanged, bounced in stupid music that crowded the room with wrong notes. Yatsu frowned the way a chef frowns when someone sprinkles sugar on a steak. He adjusted. Naruto was already moving. He let two tendrils run under a bench and up the table leg to yank it just as Yatsu stepped back. The neat man stepped into nothing and recovered by being irritatingly good at subtle steps. "You hurt people because you're afraid of gods," Naruto said, anger making him lucid. "Try being brave instead." "That's what we're doing," Yatsu said, with the genuine bafflement of the deeply sincere. Naruto wanted to punch him more for that than the fork. He didn't get the chance. Yatsu cut a line across the clamps he'd just wedged and the bell swung and screamed with personal malice. Naruto's suit clawed his lungs. He saw Anko in his mind, palm bleeding, grinning through it, and decided not to faint. He went for Yatsu's hands. It didn't look like a pretty move. He slammed the fork wrist with the narrow edge of his forearm and put all the inconvenient love he had for this village into the blow. Bones complain at different PT chess when they crack. This was a high one. Yatsu gasped and dropped the fork. He did not make a useless sound. He reached for a second instrument at his hip with professional speed. Naruto was already there. He webbed it, yanked it free, and flung it into the tower brace where it stuck like a fly. Yatsu stood very still. He looked at his hand with the distant curiosity of a man realizing the violin he loved would never sound the same again. Then he looked at Naruto with something like sadness. "You could have been a cantor," he said. "I'm busy," Naruto replied. Outside, the sand behemoth staggered again. Temari's wind ripped a trench through a rooftop and opened a line of sight Naruto wanted. He swung out of the tower, through a line, and fell into the square where Shukaku howled louder than bells. He pushed the red back with his shoulder, pulled black up over his eyes, and slammed a palm into sand one more time until what W. As under it had to pay attention or lose. Gaara blinked. He was on his back, sand pretending to be a pillow. He looked like someone who'd been interrupted. Temari took 2 steps into the space between him and the monster and held her fan like an oath. For the first time in hours, she let her fear show in the set of her jaw. "Brother," she said, and didn't ask him to stop. She asked him to be. Gaara's gaze slid to Naruto. Then to the crowd, then to the sky. He breathed a sound that might have been a word and might have been a memory of one. The sand settled, sullen and uncertain. Naruto sank to one knee because pretending not to would have been ridiculous. Hinata was there the same moment without needing to be called. She pressed a cloth behind his ear where blood had dried to a tacky ache. She didn't say, "I told you to watch the notes." She counted under her breath until his breath decided to match again. "Stay with me," she said. "I'm here," he said, and believed it. Tenten dropped too. a squat in front of him and held up a chime. Version 3, she said, like a shopkeeper laying out new stock. I tuned it with the clapper wrapped in wire from their posts. It sings wrong enough that right gives up for a second. I love you, Naruto told her, meaning it in exactly the way that makes life better without making it more complicated than it needs to be. Enko arrived with blood down in her wrist and a satisfied tilt to her mouth like a wolf who'd ruined a trap with her teeth. Prime Cantor's going to remember me when it rains, she said. Also I stole his favorite note. She wiggled bleeding fingers. Old trick. Thank you, Naruto said, sincerely. Don't kiss my hand in public, she warned, deadpan. People will talk. Kasai had gone. He'd left a smear of red and 3 knives embedded in a wall in a pattern that made Naruto think of laughter. The choir had retreated, too, not routed but moving as if a schedule had been met. Fire stepped delicately over the lip of a baker. Wyan decided to find work somewhere else. The stadium pitched the last of its dust into the air like a failed prayer. Villagers dared begin the work of naming their losses. Naruto stood when his legs agreed to be legs. He and Temari walked Gaara out of the worst rubble between them without asking permission. Temari's hand hovered near Gaara's arm but didn't touch. Naruto took the other side and at their pace to the speed of someone who should have fallen months ago and hadn't. When Gaara leaned, they both pretended it was the wind. On the parapet of a smashed watch post, Naruto stopped. The village spread below in the blue light of afternoon tilting toward evening, roofs like scales, streets like veins. He had the particular ache of a day that had not ended anybody he loved, which is its own kind of pain. Hinata finished the bandage at his ear and smoothed the edge with the pad of her thumb, slow. You look like yourself, she said. He smiled. Do I? More, she said, and left him with that. Which was too much and exactly right. Temari's fan clacked shut. The sound carried an agreement across the space between them that didn't need words. If you ever need my wind, she said, ask for it like you did today. Don't ask for it like a favor. He nodded. Same goes for my lines. Enko tipped a flask to her lips, grimaced, and glared into it when it revealed itself to be full of nothing. Choir's going to the desert, she said, practical as a map. Prime thinks wind will hide his notes. He's wrong about wind. She glanced meaningfully at Temari, who graciously pretended she hadn't seen the compliment and pocketed it later. We'll take the desert on the way to whatever the sky thinks it's doing, Naruto said. What the sky thinks it's doing? Tenten echoed. He answered by looking up. The evening had cleared enough and fallen far enough for stars. One of them wasn't supposed to be there. It was black in the way that drinks black, a hole that had changed its mind, with a rim of red so fine a blind man would have called him a liar for seeing it. It pulsed, very slightly, as if amused. Kurama stirred like a weight shifting in sleep. Naruto felt the fox's notice lick the base of his skull. Don't like that, Enko said, very quietly. Me neither, Tenten murmured. It looks curious. Hinata slid closer to Naruto by a half step. She didn't take his hand. She aligned her shoulder with his. They looked like people who had already decided where to stand when the weather came. Naruto let the red twitch and pressed it down. He let the black study the sky like a workbench. He set his jaw in a way that made his teeth stop claiming his attention. He said nothing heroic because heroism feels more honest when it's busy. Yatsu left the tower sometime after the first stars decided their places. He held his damaged hand carefully with the other and looked at it like a prayer book with a torn page. He didn't look down. He looked up at the black star and smiled faintly. Iway, a man smiles at a door he knows will open if he knocks often enough. Kasai sat on a rooftop 2 blocks away and swung his legs like a child, humming. The red swarmed around him in arabesques and fell into his mouth and came out his eyes. Later, he told the star, toasting it with an invisible glass. Later we make it art. Hinata finished her work and tucked the last strip. Can you hear me? She asked. Always, Naruto said. Then count with me, she whispered, because sometimes you do the same small thing on both the easy days and the hard to teach your heart that it isn't alone. He counted. The black fell in with the number, grudging and grateful. The red sulked and then knocked once at his heart and rolled over, pretending to sleep with one eye open like a dog too smart to trust anyone fully, even itself. Down in the streets, people started putting their houses back where they belonged. Tenten passed out chimes to hands that didn't know they'd need them tomorrow. Anko went find a drink and a fight and maybe a clean shirt if the night was feeling generous. Tamari stood with Gaara on a wall that had forgiven them both for existing long enough to offer them a view. The Eind picked its teeth with the bones of bad plans. Naruto stared at the star until his eyes made the ordinary ones blur and the wrong one stay sharp. He didn't say promise me, he said to himself, and to whatever in him answered. Protect first, power second. It was not poetry, it was a ledger entry. The star seemed to weigh the village and the boy in their agreement, and then, with the lazy shrug of something older than bells and younger than stubbornness, it pulsed again and stayed. He licked dry lips and smiled, small. Okay, he told the night, with a sincerity that made it feel like a handshake. We'll dance. The wind took the word and tucked it in a pocket where the morning would find it. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Sand that sings of knives. The desert began before the maps said it would. Grass went brittle, rivers turned into memory of a line. The road loosened and sighed, and then there wasn't one, just a suggestion in the way the dunes leaned and the wind gave advice. Tamari took point without a ceremony. Everyone let her. They traveled at dawn and dusk and slept in the hour the sun forgot mercy. Anko taught the team how to steal shade. Cloak propped on a spear, body tucked small, mouth covered with a damp cloth. Tenten rigged a sling to a wand and walked the camp perimeter at night with a string of her chimes humming the wrong key to foxes and curious men. Hinata watched the horizon and Naruto's pulse with the same care, reading both like a language she didn't need to prove she knew. Naruto learned to listen to sand. It had a rasp and a rhythm, fine grains hissed, heavier ones whispered. The black inside him liked the stillness under the wind, the way the dunes hid lines of strength the same way trees do. He kept his armor thin and close, not the full shroud, just a while you walk skin that shaded and breathed and drank heat into a place where his blood could carry it away. On the third morning the wind came in wrong. Tamari stopped on a rise and lifted her fan a third of the way open, head tilted. Look at the shadows, she murmured. They were too tidy. Wind is sloppy when it's honest. Today it had met someone who preferred straight edges. Wires, Tenten said, already angling down the leeward face, boots silent. She knelt at a patch where dune crust met the limestone spine of a low canyon and brushed away a skim of sand. Thin lines ran across, almost invisible. Where they touched the rock, tiny bronze cups sat half buried, mouths pointed at the sky. Bells again, Naruto said. The ache behind his ears flexed just to say hello. He breathed steady. ND counted with his thumb against the heel of his hand. The suit pressed back, attentive, not afraid. Choir of silence, Anko said cheerfully. Prime Cantor Yatsu likes clean geometry. Takes all the joy out of traps. Tamari surveyed the canyon cut, a dried river mouth gnawed into the plateau. They've strung a web across the entrance, she said, irony tugging one corner of her mouth. Cute, considering. Naruto didn't smile at the symmetry. We go through, he said. Quiet, then fast. Hinata touched the rock with 2 fingers and closed her eyes, Byakugan opening. Her breath shortened by a hair. There's a cavity in the canyon wall. Built rooms, stone and steel, she said. The resonance hum is dense. A chamber near the center, shields layered on shields. She blinked, focused past the stone. One chakra signature inside the high shield room, thin, constant, like someone forced to leak on a schedule. Her jaw tightened. She's alive. Tenten's eyes glanced to Tamari, then Naruto. Karen. Temari's fan closed with a clipped sound. Suna lost a sensor a week ago near the monastery road. Her description fits. Red hair, glasses, temperament of barbed wire. She looked at Naruto. If she's in there, it's a trap. We expect that, Naruto said. And take her anyway. He and Tenten crawled under the first 2 wire runs, Hinata marking gaps with soft clicks of tongue on teeth like a metronome you feel more than hear. Anko cut 1 cup free with an obscene flourish and stuffed it in a pouch. Tenten hissed. Anko winked and inched on. Tamari, last, planted 3 fan points silently into sand and mapped wind like a carpenter tapping studs. They reached the lip of the canyon and looked down. The lab wasn't a building. It was an absence. Half the canyon wall had been carved out and cove, red with a skin of rock and wickerwork and bell wires. Against that camouflage sat 4 rectangular openings, each wrapped in foil-thin mesh. The hum spilled from those mouths like a polite throat clearing. External lattice. Tenton breathed, already tracing it with her eyes. 3 nodes visible, 2 buried. I can detune 2 for 30 seconds each. A minute if I break my toys. Break them, Anko said. Don't break all of them. Naruto countered, smiling because the argument always landed right here and because he wanted Tenton angry at the right time for the right reason. They watched the patrol. 2 maskers walked with that unsettling, trained quiet, and a third stayed on a high walkway with a tuning fork across his shoulder like a farmer's hoe. The fork carried casual authority. Naruto hated it. They divided not with a speech but a glance and the economy of practice. Temari and Tenton slid along the canyon's lip, ghosting toward the external nodes. Anko and Hinata vanished into the nearest throat of shadow, a slit where a drainage line had been forgotten by a builder who never imagined Shinobi would thank him. Naruto laid his palm flat to the canyon wall and let the suit thin and slip like oil into a seam above the mesh and then, gently, through. On the other side the air tasted wrong. It wasn't thin, or stale, or poisoned. It was correct. It had been taught to behave by pay. Opal who thought vowels should stand up straight. Naruto found the ceiling beam and lay along it like a second shadow while 2 masks passed below, hands folded in front of them like monks at a tedious rite. He watched their footfalls. He counted their breaths. On the 3rd breath he moved. A tendril dropped and very softly lifted a ring of keys from a belt. Another touched a fork handle and nudged it 2 finger widths left. Not enough to disarm, just enough to make a reflex later become a mistake. He waited, listening to his own heart and the lab's hum, then flowed to the next room. The high, shield chamber sat inside a honeycomb of ducts and closets and corridors drawn by a neat mind. Naruto followed wires, not walls. Where the wires thickened he went thinner, until he hit the core. 3. Metal frames like harps stood around a stone table. Atop the table lay a girl who looked like she'd declare herself a woman just to disagree with you. Red hair plastered to her jaw. Wire laced over her arms and throat. A copper bell with glass walls turned slowly above her chest. Inside it hung a seed the color of carnage. Her eyes were open. They focused on him and narrowed to slits. Don't stand there like a pretty ghost, she rasped. You're making the pitch drift. Either cut me down or hum in A. Naruto bit back a laugh because she was bleeding out on a frequency and still rude. He dropped from the beam and landed on the edge of the frame, weighed like a cat. The suit suffused his hands. He touched a wire and felt the hum try to vaporize his skin. The suit hissed. He tuned his breath till Hinata's count whispered up his spine. 3 anchors, he said. Which one overcommitted? The left. She rolled her eyes. Obviously. They never compensate for desert nights. She shifted minutely and winced. You planning to wrestle the resonance cage solo, hero, or do you have friends who brought scissors? Both. He palmed a seal tag Tenton had sketched the night before in the blue hour, slapped it to the left frame, and forced the pitch down half a step with a grunt that tasted like iron. The wire slackened. He slid 2 fingers between coil and skin and bled into the decision a little because pain buys time. He cut the 2nd anchor with a tendril the thickness of twine and the 3rd by ripping the bell from its chain and tossing it aside. It hit the floor and rolled until it lay vibrating in an ugly, childish note. Karen sat up and slapped his chest with a palm. Ow, she said furiously. I told you the pitch drifted, not snapped. Then she stopped and squinted. What is that under your skin? Don't say. Diet, lunch, Naruto deadpanned, and then, softer, we're getting you out. Her mouth did something that transported him instantly to a memory of every bossy kid in a courtyard who had secretly saved a dozen kittens. Fine, but if I fall I'm biting you. Fair. He scooped her with a gentleness he didn't perform. She yelped and then pretended she hadn't. The suit scanned his forearms and widened his grip. He moved. The door at the far end hissed open. 4 white masks entered in a line as if that made them harder to count. Behind them Prime Cantor Yatsu walked with his hands behind his back. Face pure neatness. His splendid right hand sat in a leather brace, elegant even wounded. He looked at the torn bell, Naruto's black sheen palms, Karen's glare. "Host," he said. "Thief." To Karen, he added, with politeness that made Naruto want to break his teeth, "Tool." "Liar." Karen shot back. She spat. It landed short. She looked offended at physics. Yatsu lifted his good hand. 4 posts rose from the floor, humming. Air tightened with a coherent threat. Naruto felt the first squeeze in the sack behind his sinuses where pain likes to practice. He planted high,'s feet and bled a little more into his breath. "Tamari," he whispered, hoping wind carried where wires did. Now, wind answered like a partner who had been listening without asking to be thanked. The floor vent behind Naruto's ankles coughed as a draft shoved itself down the throat of the lab, knocking a fraction of the lattice off key. Tenten's first chime kissed the post nearest the door and sang wrong enough to make right hesitate. Hinata's palm slid between 2 ribs on a mask in the hull and the man's knees forgot their job. Anko laughed and smashed a second post with a gleeful profanity about engineers. Yatsu's expression barely shifted. He adjusted the fork's angle with a professional's small, economical twist. The cage corrected around Naruto, folding. It wasn't a net now. It was a fist. Naruto went to a knee with a sound he didn't like making in front of anyone. Karen's breath hitched. The suit tried to dig itself out through his shoulder blade like a frightened animal. His ears filled with cotton and knives. Hinata's voice arrived, low and fierce, like the part of a song only you hear. 1, 2, 3, 4, he answered hoarsely. On 5, he did something ugly and effective. He set Karen down behind the 3rd frame and used the frame like a man uses a badly placed door, as something to crash against so the next step can be taken. "Cute," Yatsu remarked. He touched the fork to the floor, barely. The note went corrector. Naruto's black almost let go. The glass bell reliquary above the table, careless where he'd tossed it, cracked. The seed inside had the modesty of fruit. It did not announce itself like a god. It lifted. It bloomed a little. It split into threads that made every instinct Naruto had learned throw its hands up and yell. Not smoke. Not spider. Not blood. Something that loved knives and multiplication in equal measure. The red inside Naruto went wild with delight, slamming its face to his ribs like a kid who'd heard his favorite song in a shop. It did not ask. It tried to run. "No," Naruto said, and for a second his voice wasn't a sound, it was a grip. He took the red by the throat inside his own chest the way you keep a dog from running into traffic. "Listen." It thrashed and laughed and burned and brightened until his fingers shook. He could let it out and end the cage and possibly everything else. He didn't want an end. He wanted a choice. "Rules," he ground out, as the seed's threads scissored into the vents and the floor and the cracks in his vision. "We bind to my word. We don't seed strangers. We protect first." It bit the Yules with its sharp teeth and tasted them for blood. He held. It eyed the knife in his voice and the way the black braced his bones. It enjoyed the idea of being told where to go by someone who could make it fun. Yes, it purred. Horrible and honest. Fun on purpose. Naruto exhaled and opened his hand. Red tore through him like a fever breaking. Not everywhere. Not a flood. A surge he contained by points. Wrists, shoulder, spine. It lined his tendrils in filigree. It sharpened his grip until his palms were thorns. It flooded the edges of his vision with a thin crimson that didn't drown his blue. The black didn't slap it. It housed it. They didn't become one thing. They became two agreeing, barely. He stood into the lattice and it didn't crush him. He moved, not powerfully, but decisively. Tenten's second chime shattered. She did not curse. She grabbed a third from the bandolier and slung it. It rang the post Yatsu hadn't guarded yet on instinct. The note wavered. Hinata's foot slid under a mosque's knee with anatomist precision. Anko tore the second lattice brace free using the edge of the third frame and a grin. Karen, braced, reached sideways and snapped a chalk seal across the FL. With a furious scribble as if to scrawl her name on Yatsu's mockery. Lines bloomed in a pattern that was ugly and correct. The air hiccuped. Naruto took that breath and spent it. He shoulder check. Ed the third post hard enough to put his rotator cuff on notice and used a red-edged line to hook the fourth. He yanked. The post screamed. The lattice broke not with a bang but a tired sigh as if embarrassed to have tried. Yatsu stepped back, pure grace. He used the fork to deploy a field the size of a cloak around himself and 2 masks, not retreat, just good resource management. Noted, he said, unruffled. Your hunger follows rules. That will make you predictable. I'm unpredictable about who I listen to, Naruto said, believing it in his sore bones. He spidered a line behind Yatsu and yanked a shelf of tidy instruments down. Bells ringing wrong wrong wrong. Yatsu raised his splinted hand in a gesture almost like a blessing. Desert rendezvous at dusk, he said, and smiled the way men smile who think they own dictionaries. Try to arrive with all your parts. He withdrew under cover of the harmonic cloak, posts sinking as if they'd never been. Naruto considered pursuing and decided not to chase a man whose weapon is a room he can take with him anywhere. He turned instead to the glass bell, to the red threads crawling toward vents. He opened his right hand and let the red heat aloud bloom into a net like 1,000 tiny hooks. He dragged the seed's children back by their cravings. Here, he told the red, eat me instead. It surged, happy as a wicked thing can be when given a rule it enjoys breaking. He shook when it was done. Hinata's hand was at his temple, cool and steady. Breathe, she said. Her count slid under his skin like a bar dropped across the gate he kept. I'm here, he nodded, body catching up to the relief. Tenten crouched, panting, hair stuck to her cheek, 3 broken chimes lined up by her knee like small dead soldiers. Anko wiped her cut palm on her thigh and then remembered that's not how infection works and sighed and wrapped it with the disgust of someone who hated being right about consequences. Karen sat on the edge of the frame, legs shaking, chin up. So you're the idiot with the black suit, she said. And now also an idiot with a red one. And a fox. And a village. Also friends, Naruto said. Name's Naruto. Karen, she snapped. Then, grudging, thank you. I hate being bait. I hate being smart enough to know I'm bait while being bait. She poked his shoulder with a strength she did not have. Who told you to hold your breath like that on a subharmonic? That was terrible technique and it worked. Hinata, Naruto said, and his smile pushed some of the pain out of the room. Tenten, Anko, Temori's the wind you're about to hear. Karen's eyes flicked to Hinata and softened half a degree. Then to Tenten and narrowed with playful danger. Then to Anko and widened like a cat meeting a dog it respects. Then to Temari, W. Ho stepped in on a gust with dust in her hair, fan folded like a judgment, and Karen shrugged like a queen accepting a seat at a table she hadn't been invited to. Fine, she said, you're all my least favorite kind of people. Useful. They moved before the lab remembered how to be brave. Temari shoved wind down the corridors without apology, closing doors, jamming vents, turning grace into drag. Nten laid a line of tagged bolts in the canyon mouth that would sing wrong for an hour. Anko kicked a bell down the slope hard enough to make it an omen. Hinata put her palm to Naruto's ribs when he inked and lifted her brows. Pretend less. He pretended less. They hit daylight and the heat lay across their shoulders like a wet blanket. The sky had gone high and cruel and blue. The plateau stretched around them. Beautiful and empty in a way that made people lie to themselves about how much room they deserved to take up. Karen drank 3 swallows of water like a person who knew she had to ration her joy and then failed to do so. She wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist and glared east. They're not finished, she said. Choir has a rendezvous point, a flat basin cut with old wind-carved channels. They call it the choir pit. It's where they meant to call down whatever that black star is with their new toy. Sky knife, Anko said. I've seen the drawings. It hums and points and makes men in robes feel like they matter. Karen gave her a look that carried a history of priests and ropes and bad rooms. They were getting ready when they grabbed me, she said. I interrupted the alignment by existing. They refused to consider that the universe put me there mostly to be inconvenient. Naruto watched the horizon. The wrong star wasn't visible in the day, but sometimes in the corn. Of his eye something like a hole in light suggested itself and then thought better of it. He rubbed his ear to convince a ghost ache to choose a different house. We go ruin their rendezvous. Detune the pit. Save stupid men from their own notes if they won't stop even after we break the toys. We're taking her to Suna first, Temari said, nodding at Karen. It wasn't a question. We owe her Klee, and water and a door with a lock someone else doesn't own. Karen squinted at Temari's fan and then her face and tilted her head. Fine, but you're not my mother. If your guest house has scratchy blankets I will complain to a council. Temari's mouth crooked. Please do. The council thrives on despair. They walked. The sun shoved. Wind leaned against their calves like a sulking dog. Anko stayed LF a step to the rear, not because she feared being left behind but because she liked to watch backs. Tenton would have tinkered even while walking if she'd had 3 hands. As it was, she turned the B. Roken chime clappers over with her thumb and looked at the desert like it was a forge. Hinata touched Naruto's fingers once and didn't comment when the red rippled under his skin to get a look at the light. Suna met them with heat baked into stone and the hospitality of a place that has learned generosity is cheaper than walls. Temari spoke a sentence at the gate and the sentence opened. A healer. Took Karen's arm and Karen slapped her hand away and then took her arm again when her knee buckled. It was a compromise built of dignity and gratitude. Suna is good at those. They ended up on a guest house roof at midnight because that's where people always end up when their blood is too awake for beds. The tiles kept the heat like memory. The city's wind chimes were expensive, angry little things. Designed to defeat sleep in enemies and friends alike. The sky seemed lower here, and bigger. Naruto sat with his back against the wall and unwrapped the bandage at his ear because he hated being mummified. Hinata wrapped it back again with a look that asked him not to ruin her work. He let her. Temari stood at the parapet and watched the desert, not the city, fan tucked between shoulder and cheek. Bone like a messenger taking a brief rest. Tenton lay flat, hands knotted behind her head, eyes on the chime she'd hung from a nail nearby to test the breeze. Anko sprawled near the stairwell, half-as. Leap with her knife tucked under her hand, a habit and a comfort. Karen arrived in borrowed robes and a scowl that meant the water had been good and the tonic had been foul. She sank down with her back to the parapet and a noise that dared anyone to call it relief. She eyed Naruto, stared at the place on his collarbone where black and red glowed faintly under skin in the kind of light only shinobi and foxes see, and clicked her tongue. You are an idiot, she declared. I'm your idiot now, he said. For seals that keep me from breaking furniture. She sniffed, pleased in spite of herself. I'll need chalk, silver ink, and restraint, she said. 2 of those you can provide. Tenton sat up on her elbows. If we detune the pit, I want to do it with ridicule. Something petty, something a cantor would hate. We'll paint mustaches on the sky knife, Anko mumbled, eyes closed. Please don't, Temari said without looking back. The last time someone painted a mustache on a ceremonial object, the council made us use clay cups for a month as penance and my tea tasted like punishments. Hinata looked at Naruto, quiet. When you pulled the red in, she said, your pulse went jagged, then, steady. You didn't lose yourself. I had you counting, he said. He didn't pretend it had been easy. And Kurama laughed at me until I had to make it worth his time. That fox, Temari said dryly, is going to visit one day and drink all the good sake. I'll hide the good sake, Anko said, eyes still closed. Naruto turned his face to the sky. The black star wasn't visible, but he felt it in the W. The red nudged his jaw and the black steadied his shoulders. Far away, closer than yesterday, something drew a sword and it drank a little of the light. Temari, he said, tell me how wind lies. She stayed looking out over the desert. It doesn't, she said. People do, with wind as their alibi. It changes its mind. That's different, he nodded, because he had watched her make weather into a tool without pretending it was hers. Teach me not to mistake changing minds for lying. She glanced over her shoulder. Bring me chimes that sing wrong on purpose and a rope that sticks to air, she said. I'll give you a lesson and a bruise. Deal, he said. Hinata's fingers slid into his, finally, with the intimacy of a decision. She rested her head against his shoulder for a moment, not snuggling, just aligning axis to axis. How do you stay gentle when everything is so sharp? He asked, not for metaphor. I'm not gentle, she said. I'm precise. He took that in like water. Karen scowled at their joined hands. Then at herself for scowling, then at the space where she would eventually put a seal on Naruto's collarbone. Uzumaki, she said, sharper to cover softer. You break rules, I stop helping. I'm building rules, he said. Build faster, she snapped, and the way she tugged her robe around her shoulders said she'd already packed to leave with them in the morning. Sleep took them by degrees. The desert wind bared its teeth at the eaves and then forgot why it had been angry. Somewhere below, a drunk sang half of a lullaby and forgot the rest of the words. Suna held the M with the rough tenderness of a city built on sand and certainty. Naruto woke before dawn with Kurama's rumble settling in his bones like news arriving. He sat up, careful not to jostle Hinata's shoulder where it brushed his. The air had gone colder. The sky wasn't bright yet, but in the east a piece of it looked like someone had wiped a thumb across it and smudged night into 8 or 9 shades of wrong. The black star had moved. Not far, but nearer. The kind of nearer you feel in your dental work and the joint where your jaw meets your ear. Kurama's tail flicked far away and spilled heat through him. The red purred like a knife on whetstone. Anko opened one eye. Well, she said mildly. Now it feels personal. It was always going to, Tamari muttered, hiding a yawn behind the fan even when it was just them. Karen sat up all at once like a puppet being tugged by the string called agenda. We don't have a week, she announced. We probably don't have 2 days. The choir pit will hum at twilight. They'll pretend the stars knew, and they'll be wrong, and then they'll be dead, and then my breakfast will have been a waste. Pack, Naruto said. His hands were already doing it. He tucked the broken chimes and the tuned ones into separate pouches. He slid a coil of line up his sleeve. He adjusted the seal tag Tenten had left half a note high on purpose so he could thumb it down in a pinch. He lifted his eyes and met each of theirs in turn. Tamari runs the ground, he said. I obey wind. Hinata holds my count and owns my ears. Tenten breaks their notes and lives. Anko bites. First when the room demands rude behavior. Karen drains whatever the choir thinks is a battery and makes sure I don't become one. He drew a breath he liked. We make this very expensive. Amen, Anko said. Offerings accepted in sarcasm. Tenten added. Or in tea, Tamari said. After, Naruto echoed. They left Suna to sleepy streets and a sky already brightening around the smudge. People raised hands. Tamari raised her fan in answer. The desert accepted them by erasing their footprints 2 strides after they made them. The wind picked its teeth and watched. By noon the sun was a hammer. By afternoon the hammer sang. The choir pit lay ahead, a ring of carved stone around a natural basin cut by old floods. Wires radiated from a steel spindle in the center like spokes, each anchor. Ed to a bell dressed as a sandstone boulder, a dozen white masks moved along the rim, tuning by touch and habit. On a scaffold that had no right to exist in wind country stood Yatsu, splint neat, posture pure, fork raised to taste the air. He looked profoundly pleased with where he'd put his belongings. Position, Naruto asked under his breath. Tamari set the pit in her mind like a shogi board and D liked how the pieces looked when she flipped them. Wind blows cross basin. Good for us, bad for them, she said. If I drop the pressure here, and here, she pointed with the fan's tip, I see a N make a corridor you can anchor and not get peeled by their notes. Tenten, I want 4 of your chimes on the near rim, Naruto said. 2 for now, 2 for when Yatsu gets clever. He's always clever, Tenten said. Moving to the left obelisk with a grin like sharpened patience. Hinata, hands on my jaw if I go stupid, Naruto murmured. Anko, I know. Anko rolled her shoulders. Start the fight before they do. Karen set down her satchel with ceremony, drew a circle the size of a manhole with her chalk, and inked a spiral with silver. I'll make a sump, she said. If they call down anything, it falls into me and I spit it into the ground. Not elegant. Satisfying. Don't swallow it, Hinata said, very even. Karen snorted. I have taste. The first fork sang. The pit answered, buzzing. The sky above the spindle felt thinner than is healthy for a sky. Naruto felt the red lean forward with terrible joy. He kept it behind his teeth and counted. Hinata's 1 2 3, his 4 5 6. He walked out into the basin exactly when Tamari made wind and alley and Tenten made bells ashamed of their notes and Anko, with rude efficiency, stabbed a rope and made a trip line for 2. Masks who did not believe in falling until they did. Yatsu saw him and did not flinch. He tipped his chin as if acknowledging a colleague at a concert. Host, he called over the hum. Observe. People, doing something larger than themselves. Break your toys, Naruto advised, and go home. Yatsu lifted the fork and the sky turned to glass. Naruto did not meet it head on. He pivoted. He set 3 lines: air, shadow, memory, and made a triangle to stand in. The red licked his teeth. The black closed around his wrists. He made a grip he could trust. The note hit. He bent without breaking. Tenten's chime rang wrong right. One anchor boulder shivered and lost tune. Anko yanked a second wire loose and laughed when a post tried to bite her and broke a tooth. Hinata's palm found the hinge of Naruto's jaw and the world remembered how to have corners. Karen finished her spiral and sat in it, eyes closed, mouth set. The silver ink crawled inward as if hungry. When the sky smudged a hair darker above the spindle, the spiral drank first like a thirsty animal and then like a decision. Tamari dropped pressure on the far rim with a flick that would have cut most people in half if they'd been standing on it. 2 masks rolled like tumbleweeds. A third held his ground with admirable toes and then stepped exactly into the pocket of wind she'd made and found his notes go stupid in his hands. Yatsu adjusted with a surgeon's cold joy. He shaved the sky and found a note that made Naruto's eyes water. Naruto blinked the water out and refused to lose the line. He set his feet, red curling up his knuckles like calluses. Black taking the shock and sending it down his calves and into the sand where Tamari took it and gave it back to him as steadiness. It went fast and wretched and beautiful for a while. Ropes hissed. Bells begged. The fork wrote thin cuts in the air. Naruto didn't kill anyone. He made bad angles into good ones and threw men into safety against their will. He ruined 2 OD instruments with a webbing slap and an apology in his eyes. He broke Yatsu's rhythm without breaking his body. Hunger moved under his skin like weather, and he governed it. At the moment Naruto had been waiting for and Yatsu had failed to plan for, Karen's spiral caught. The sky above the spindle fluttered like a heart missing a beat. Something not cloud and not night tried to push through an F. Ound itself dragged sideways by a spiral that refused to be polite. The pit's hum shrieked and then collapsed an octave. Tenten whooped, crude and delighted. Tamari slammed a wall of wind up and the P. Rashur made 3 more bells forget what they were supposed to be. Anko stuck her tongue out at a mask before she headbutted him because sometimes you have to be a bad influence. Yatsu's face changed finally. Not much. He was a neat man. A small tiredness touched his mouth. He understood that he would not own this morning. Retreat, he said, throat raw. He twisted the fork once, cueing the pit to close like a fist. Naruto moved before the fist shut. He slung a red-etched line across Yatsu's ankles and a black one higher and pulled, then webbed him to a carved pillar with enough care to keep one shoulder away from strain. Stop ringing bells in my friends, Naruto said again, closer this time. Yatsu looked at the line on his ankle as if it were a typo in scripture. You are making a category error, he said, serene as a sink. We're punishing gods. You're punishing people, Naruto said. He didn't raise his voice. Try being brave enough to know the difference. He didn't break Yatsu's hand. He took the fork. Tenten wrapped it in 3 layers of wire like a badly behaved pet. Anko patted Yatsu's cheek with the same hand she'd used to bleed on his lattice and said, "You're lucky my boss is kinder than me." By the time the last bell went quiet, the star smudge had dimmed a hair. Not much. Enough to mean someone had told the sky. No, and the sky had remembered that sometimes it can be told. They didn't parade. They got out. On the rim, Karen staggered when she stood. Naruto was there, steadier now because asking for help had decided to make a home in him. She thrust a palm in to his chest again, habit, and closed her eyes, breathing. Your current went wild, she said. I hate that. I can fix it. She looked up, mouth set with all the gall of a person who'd survived a bad room and refused to make her voice small. Give me your chalk someday when we're not busy and I'll draw a spiral on your collarbone that makes that red sit and stay. That a proposal? Anko asked, wicked and amused. It's an intervention, Karen snapped. He collects problems and then acts surprised when they want snacks. Fair, Naruto said. Temari's hair had come loose. She didn't mind. She lean. Her hip on a rock and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, blaming sand and getting away with it because the desert protects its own. We made it expensive, she said. And we're not done, Naruto said. He looked east. The horizon was a hard line. The black star was not there, but his bones knew it had drifted and decided. Next, someone with a sword is going to fall out of the sky thinking. He's the only one who has ever owned night. Let him, Tenten said, tossing the fork to one hand and back like a challenge. I've been wanting to see if a chime can make a god flinch. Hinata slid her hand into his again without making it a moment. We'll be where you land, she said. Anko sheathed her knife and cricked her neck. And I'll tell whatever falls that we bite first. Karen bent over her chalk, drew a new spiral for the road, and muttered at him about hydration like love disguised as scolding. Tamari lifted her fan and felt the change in pressure coming all the way from the star. When the sword lands, she said, we make a wind that steals its edge. Naruto smiled, small and honest. Protect first, he said under his breath, to the red, to the black, to the fox, to the team, to himself. Power second. The desert tasted the words, approved, and moved them along. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The black star kneels. The sky split with the sound of glass, remembering it used to be sand. A seam opened from horizon to zenith, thin as a sword seen from its edge. Wind dropped a full step, then came back wrong. Everyone on the ridge felt it in their molars, the desert's breath pull. Toward the tear like a tide to a black moon. Tamari lifted her fan. Karen set her box of inks down without looking and began to draw a circle into the dust with calm, quick hands. Tenten's chimes robbed in their leather holsters as if embarrassed to be quiet. Hinata's fingers found Naruto's sleeve and didn't need to squeeze. He was already there. It wasn't a person who stepped through. It was the promise of one. The air blistered under its feet. The first step turned a patch of dune to a black glass lily pad. It paused, inhuman weight humming the world around it into compliance, and looked. Across the basin at the five of them and every mask and fork and spear that had followed their scent here. The choir of silence planted their lattice with the dignity of men in clean clothes laying out silverware on dirt. Prime Cantor Yatsu, splint neat, throat raw from yesterday's losses, lifted his fork like a conductor who has learned that the orchestra can make him a liar if he blinks at the wrong time. Containment, he said, only, quote, sure, Anko called back, rolling her shoulder as if it were a coin. We'll call it that. The harbinger took another step. The blade in its hand wasn't metal. It was night hammered thin. Where it cut, the air learned a simpler language. Its face was ordinary enough that later, when people had to make sense of it, they'd remember the cheekbones or the eyes. And then wonder why they'd forgotten all of it. A pale mark like a healed brand ran from the mouth to the ear on the right, old ownership. The mark glowed faintly now, as if something on the other end of a chain had tightened the line. Hinata leaned into Naruto's shoulder just enough for her whisper to find only him. That sword drinks, she said. It eats the outline of things. I'll give it bad outlines, he murmured. He took 2 steps forward and then stopped where he would be seen. He didn't wrap himself fully in the black. He let it line his forearms and carve his calves and draw a hood over his jaw that would keep his eyes open when the air tried to sandblast them shut. Red slid under it like a grin under a veil. He pulled in a breath as if drawing a bow. It held. Field's yours, he said to Tamari without turning. Tamari set her fan to her shoulder like a sword that breathes. Wind will not save you from stupidity, she said dryly. It will make it look prettier. Tenten, Naruto called. Layer your wrong notes into the middle distance. Not close. I want his blade walking the maze before he knows it's in one. Tenten palmed 2 chimes and put them on her belt, then another on her boot. Another between her breastbone and the place below her throat where she kept promises. She didn't say, on it. She was. Karen, Naruto said, already draining the ambient stupidity, she answered, chalk circle blooming. Her first spiral opened like an iris. Silver ink glinted with an appetite that made Yatsu's jaw knot. If they call down anything that wants to be a god, my pit will want it more. Anko pivoted her knife so the light along it would make masks squint. I start fights that need starting, she offered. Start the smaller ones, Naruto said. Leave me the tall one. Generous, she said, but the smile hid pride. Hinata's hand brushed the hinge of his jaw. She didn't say, 1 2 3. He didn't say, 4 5 6. They breathed like a habit. The Harbinger looked at Naruto. It took him in the way black water takes in a stone tossed from a cliff. A measurement, a welcome, a promise to keep what it is given. When it spoke, the voice had the steadiness of one who had never had to ask for anything twice. Who owns you? It asked. Naruto didn't move his eyes off the blade. I do, he said. The thing tilted its head as if considering a new brand of insect. We have the same landlord, it said, and raised the sword. The first cut arrived before the sword moved. The sand under Naruto's feet vitrified in a perfect wedge. A second later the sound caught up, quiet and appalled. He wasn't there. He'd already thrown a line that wasn't quite to a rock and wasn't quite to shadow and wasn't quite to memory. He swung across the bite, boots skimming the new glass's edge, and felt the blade's song try to vibrate his bones into compliance. Tenten's first chime answered it an octave down and wrong. The answer snagged the sword's edge like a burr. The Harbinger's wrists were tidy and merciless. It corrected. Temari dropped pressure across its left shoulder with an invisible shove and the sword cut a rib of wind instead of a throat. Sand hissed in gratitude. Two masks took the moment to throw a rope weight at Naruto's ankles. Enko took the moment to be unhelpful, stepped into their line, and cut the rope with the clean rudeness of someone correcting an insult in a bar. Yatsu lifted his fork. Contain. Lower it, Naruto said without looking, and his voice carried command across notes. You're out of your depth. Yatsu's mouth thinned. He kept the fork ready, hovering at exactitudes. And for a breath the fact that he did not strike mattered more than if he had. Naruto moved again. He did not meet the Harbinger head-on. He turned every approach into a corner. Line to a dune lip. A red-edged toe hooked to a sliver of shadow. A web set into a nerve of air that would be wind a second later. Every time the sword took a bite, he made it eat dissonance. Tenten's chimes made a hive around the fight. Every wrong ring bled the blade's song by a handful of heartbeats. Karen's spiral sucked at the sky. The tear closed a little around the edges like a wound deciding whether to scar. The black star nowhere visible crept under the skin of the day like a fever. Closer, Hinata called softly when Naruto took one step too brave. He corrected without pride. She saw the twitch in the Harbinger's shoulder and spoke the number before the swing, her timing the metronome that turned his impossible dodges into routine. On the fifth exchange Naruto tested the sword with his hands. He shouldn't have. He did anyway. He reached for the flat of it with the red-earled gauntlet and caught in every part of him learned what the blade was made to teach. It sang, "No," into his fingers. It whispered, "Stop," into his joints. It ate the outline of his palm and started on the idea of his thumb. The black under his skin tried to banking itself around the wound like a tree grows around a fence post. The red pressed against the edge as if the edge were a tongue to kiss. Naruto surged. He didn't pull away. He pushed. He shoved momentum into the sword along a line T. Hat was not cutting and felt the Harbinger blink. Not in the eyes, in the wrist. A surprise lived there. The sword skidded a fraction into a space designed for safety and found a chime. The chime rang ugly and true. Tenten whooped. Got you. Quote. The Harbinger cut the chime in half with the little disdain of a chef slicing a sprig of herb. The ring went off somewhere it wouldn't help. Naruto didn't rely on it. He took that heartbeat and planted his foot into the Harbinger's ribs with a crimson spiral nested quietly in the heel like an apology delivered late. The thing went back 2 steps. Sand melted. Its brand line flared, right mouth to ear, like a fuse. Something farther away than high noon turned its head. It wasn't just a weapon in the Harbinger's hand. The sword was a channel. The black STAR tugged on the human to see if the toy could stand. The choir saw it. Men raised to hate gods in theory saw the gods line in practice and did what camel drivers do when ropes go taut, the wrong one tugged. 2 masks tightened a lattice on reflex. Yatsu hissed and snapped his fingers, the closest he came to losing composure. Stand clear, he said sharply. Stand clear. Enko flashed him a grin like a warning label. You heard the man, she murmured to the masks, and made herself a wall only idiots would test. Now, Naruto said. He didn't shout. He looked at Temari, at Tenten, at Hinata's palm on the knife hinge of his jaw. At Karen inside her silver gut. Corridor. Chime. Spiral. Sump. Tamari made a hallway in air. The wind knelt, predatory and polite. Tenten threw 2 chimes that Harmo nizzed into the exact wrongness the blade had been correcting for, always, and suddenly could not. Hinata's breath landed on 1, and Naruto moved on 2, and the Harbinger swung on 3, and found. The world had already chosen a different 4. Naruto ran into the sword's umbra. He had no business being there. He made it his business. Red climbed to his cheekbones, black sealed his arms like oath wrappings. He brought his hands together and spun a whirl that had nothing to do with a textbook Rasengan anymore. It was foxfire held inside black silk braided with knives. The air around it stepped out of the way. The crimson spiral Rasenshuriken screamed. It screamed disobedience. It screamed joy. It sang wrong notes at the right time. He drove it toward the sliver where the brand's line poo. LLED hard and the sword's song had to go to stay true. It hit. A noise like a laugh being drowned tore across the basin. The Harbinger's sword stuttered. Star hungry, star fed, star confused. Naruto took the confusion and used it like a ladder. He slid, planted a line on nothing, yanked, and dragged the Harbinger 3 paces into the open mouth of Karen's spiral. The silver drank. It didn't gorge. It wasn't a flood. It took sips of the sword's song and turned them into sand. Karen's teeth were bared in a grin that had all the holiness of survival and none of the piety. Stay, she hissed through them. The sword wanted none of it. It flared. It cut. The spiral's rim splashed like liquid metal. Karen's ink line smoked and then steadied. I said stay, she told a god with the tone good teachers use on small tyrants. The spiral deepened, greedy and exact. The Harbinger leaned down and looked at Naruto as if seeing him for the first time. It was not a glare. It was not rage. It was curiosity, the kind that eats. You will break, it said, as if offering him a kindness. We bind our hunger to my word, Naruto said, and let the world drop away. The mindscape wasn't a sewer anymore. The Torii stood over a black sea. Lightning ran under the skin of the water like red fish. The black at his shoulders stood at his left, taller than him, armor without a man inside it, until he looked, and it was whatever it needed to be. The red sprawled on the rail with its legs over the edge, idly twirling a blade made from one of his rules. Kurama lounged in the gate's shadow, vast, orange, enjoying himself far too much. Last rule, Naruto said. He was breathing hard, here and there. Sweat made him honest. We bind to my word. Not because I'm strongest. Because I'm the one who picks people first. Red flipped the blade and licked it without cutting its tongue. Fun dies when rules are boring, it purred. Make them beautiful. Make them useful, Black said, a voice like stone wearing velvet. Make them ours, Kurama rumbled. And the chain on his paw lay slack, as if it had never been there. Naruto didn't ask. He told them, when I move, you move. When I stop, you stop. When I say mercy, you open your hand even when it hurts. When I say strike, you don't miss. Silence, not acquiescence, consideration. Red walked its fingertips along the railing and then, on a whim, fell backwards in to the sea with a shout and came up laughing, hair slicked back into a crown of knives. Black stepped forward and set a gauntlet on Naruto's shoulder in the formal gravity of old oaths. Yes, Red said, delighted. We'll have better fun. Yes, Black said, and it sounded like a temple agreeing to let a child run in the nave. Kurama's laugh rolled, deep and approving. About time, cub. Naruto PPED out of his mind and back into his body with the feeling of a door closing behind him that chose to be a gate. He didn't look different. He felt like a decision. Armor slid over him that was not clothing. Red traced it in rivers under black like veins seen through thin skin. A hum rose where the symbiote had hissed before. The hum matched Hinata's count without being told. He advanced. The Harbinger swung. The sword ate air, light, angles. Naruto put his hand out and the sword bit it and didn't. The gauntlet didn't intercept, it accepted and returned. The edge lost a sliver of song every time it struck. Tenten's chimes filled the holes with ugly beauty. Tamari held the corridor with wind that bent around the coat of a woman with perfect posture and no patience for men wearing other men's gods. Naruto cut. Not the Harbinger. The brand. He slipped inside the shape of the next stroke and set his palm to the mark's line. Foxfire flared under red webs under black runes. He didn't push power into it. He pushed word, promise, rule. The line shuddered and cracked. The sword's song blew needles into his teeth. He bared them back. Unbind, he said, and meant it for the person, not the weapon. Karen's spiral convulsed and swallowed the note that would have kept the Harbinger a puppet. The Necrosword sliver screamed without sound and fled. Nothing moved. Then a streak of impossible black peeled out of the blade's edge and fled upward. The tear in the sky stretched greedily to receive it. The sliver vanished into the dark as if to tell on them. For a heartbeat the Harbinger stood with its sword in the ground, breathing like a man drowning on dry land. Then its knees gave the way all knees belong to gravity. The blade stayed standing. The person didn't. Hinata's hand pulled Naru to back half a step because victory and arrogance sound similar inside your chest. He let her. He looked down at the Harbinger and saw a human face, not a monster's. It had the specific slackness of someone with the worst hangover on the planet. Eyes blinked, focused, watered. What did I do? The person asked. Horse. Survived, Naruto said. He gestured with 2 fingers and 2 masks moved in despite themselves. And he saw their hands shake. Help him. Don't worship him. Don't hate him. Just help. They did because the alternative was standing still and the wind would not allow that today. The black star pulsed once, 2, as if offended to be refused, and then dimmed. Not gone. Retreating. Curious. Somewhere beyond the blue, something old and elegant and bored wrote Naruto's name down. A choir of silence stood in a ragged half-circle around a fight that had given them no place to sing. Yatsu looked at his fork as if it had been an argument he had lost and then at Naruto as if Evolua. Ching, a student who refused to write inside the lines and kept producing correct answers anyway. Remove your masks, Naruto said, not loud, not gentle. Or leave my desert. A few left. Most did not. One by one, faces came out into the hot air. Human eyes. Ordinary scowls. Old grief. Clean, stupid pride set down in the sand so hands could be empty long enough to help. Yatsu's hand moved to his mask and paused. He didn't take it off. He lowered his fork instead and said, "We will not wring you to your knees again." Good start, Anko muttered. He looked at her, then at her torn palm, then away. Perhaps, he said, it was not a promise. It was a man not lying to himself for a moment. Tenten walked over to Naruto with a chime that had not cracked and hung it on a cord. She looped the cord over his neck like a medal at a small town race and smirked. "In case you forget who you are," she said. Tamari closed her fan. "If the wind carries you toward Suna," she said, "come in through the east gate. People there will stand for you even when I'm not home to shout them into it." Karen squinted up at Naruto's collarbone where the rule hum lived and tapped lightly with a chalk-stained knuckle. "I have opinions about that seal," she said. "Tomorrow I draw it on you properly and you sit very still and do not flirt with death or girls while I do it." "Death isn't my type," he said. "Girls are," she said, deadpan. And then ruined her own line by smiling at Hinata in a way that made Hinata duck and look pleased. Hinata stepped close enough that the spiral on the ground brushed her sandals. She rested her forehead against Naruto's, brief and steady, and said, "I'm not afraid of the dark if it keeps its promises." He closed his eyes for that and told the black under his skin and the red he would forfeit a great many interesting battles before he would risk that sentence. "What now?" Anko asked, wiping sweat with her wrist, knife already half forgotten because the work was over and she was thinking about food. "We help the person," Naruto said, nodding at the ex-harbinger as 2 masks, faces bare, mouths set, bound a wound like men who had been taught a new job. "We take apart the sky knife. We carry Yatsu's fork until he earns it back or stops wanting it." He looked at the sword stuck upright in the basin and wished he had never learned to like the way it looked. "And we put that in a room that has 3 locks and 5 jokes on the door so anyone who comes to worship it has to laugh first." "Blasphemy is policy," Tenten mused. "I can live with that." "Live with it loudly," Tamari advised. They didn't celebrate. They cleaned up. The wind did its part, scouring tracks, smoothing out places where pride could catch and grow. The sky stitched itself closed around a sore that would never quite vanish. Before dawn the next day, Naruto walked alone. He left the ridge without telling anyone where he was going because some roads are only wide enough for one set of feet. The desert gave way to scrub. Scrub gave way to coast, and the ocean met him with salt that made him think of ink drying. The shrine at Uzushio had not rebuilt itself out of sentiment. The torii still leaned like a smile with a broken tooth. The scroll case he had never returned to its shelf leaned back on a ledge as if it had known he would come. Red and black slid up his fingers when he unrolled a fresh sheet of paper. They did not try to write for him. They curled around the brush, respectful and nosy. He ground ink. He waited until the first bird had the courage to sing into a morning that had learned to be suspicious of itself. He wrote in big strokes because small ones would have made him feel like he was filling forms. Protect first. Power second. The brush stopped. The curves shone for a breath, wet and thick, and then sank into the fiber. He didn't bow to the paper. He folded it and slid it into the scroll case like a person putting away a good tool after a long day. He stood, breathed the salt, and felt the hum under his ribs answer Hinata's count he could hear from memory and Temari's wind he could feel refusing to be owned and Anko's laughter that always arrived just before. E-treble and Tenten's chime that had somehow, impossibly, become the sound. Home, made and Karen's chalk scolding him from somewhere very nearby even when she wasn't. The ocean sighed in the voice of a very old friend. Naruto smiled at it, small and real, hungry. He asked the dark on his skin. It said yes. He said, me too. They stepped off the cliff into air together. Chapter 5 End.